Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome back to yet another episode of the Snarp Fangle podcast. I am your host, Jacob Metzger, along with my lovely co-host, the man who brought you the hit song, Walk Like a Camel 2, Keep on Walking, as well as the controversial song with the Myriad Temptress, with the lyrics, boys, if she's all charm, she's as dry as the sand she's walking on. Ladies and gentlemen, David Reed.
Oh, man, thanks for that introduction, Jake.
I cannot wait to hear the remastered version of Myriad Temptress, David. It's not your best work, but it was pretty all right. I can't lie. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing fantastic, in fact. And, you know, on a side note, I want to say I saw that recent indie flick you starred in. It was really great.
Really? Oh, you did? Oh, thank you for watching it.
What was that? Oh, it was I'm a Little Retarded, the Alex Jones story. I gotta say, I think you did a fantastic role as the lead.
I had to lose a ton of weight and then immediately get it back. So they recorded the fat, older version of Alex Jones first, and then I had to lose a ton of weight and we did the younger stuff. That's when I kind of like got my acting chops really going. It was like we had that Stephen A. Smith money completely out of the Illuminati. I'm sure he's not part of it.
No, sure.
Oh, I wanted to tell you, David, you know what movie I watched for the first time the other night, like ever? It was Ghostbusters, like the original.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I never seen it before. Really, really enjoyed it. I'm glad it was a nice standalone movie. And there's like no sequels, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Just
it's one of those things.
I can't believe they never made any more than
I know,
one.
right? They
Yeah.
just they knew what they had, and they're like, okay,
Yeah,
we
like-
don't need to dilute the power of this anymore. We don't need to commercialize it.
Yeah.
We're just going to leave it as is.
I feel like, you know, in a different I feel like, speaking of like us like talking about alternate dimensions and different timelines, I feel like in a different timeline, Back to the Future swapped places with Ghostbuster. And we have like in that timeline 7 different sequels of Back to the Future.
Back to the Future cinematic universe.
Yeah, Back to the Future cinematic universe.
Oh my
They're talking
God.
about Biff's kids and everything, you know?
Jesus.
Oh, man.
That sounds terrible.
I'm really glad they're not touching that in our timeline, at least for now.
Yeah.
I
They've
mean,
just
they have
touched
to
all
get-
the other ones.
They have to get Bob Gale, I think that's his name, to die first and then go from there.
There you
So,
go.
Yeah. Nothing against not Bob Dole, Bob Gale. Maybe they're related. I don't know. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed Ghostbusters. It was a fun romp. It was a fun time. It was such a stark diet, like just going into it with fresh eyes, just for before we get into our topics, like going into that movie and watching it for what it is. It's really fun to watch a movie that's not every other second it's a joke or intentional joke. It's just these people are genuinely funny characters in a real world setting. And it's just like they're ridiculous people in themselves, but they're in a world that is just completely like grounded and normal. And then you throw this ghost thing into it. Like there's a shot when Sigourney Weaver and the other guy she's with is walking like in this like courtyard or whatever, and just and just Bill Murray, like it just cuts to a shot of him going like doing the silly walk from Monty Python, like strolling to her, and then completely cuts back to him. It was like, what was that? Why did you guys put that in there? But I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was very funny. I don't think I'm gonna watch 2 or 3. I think I'm just gonna jump to like the most recent reboots, probably.
No, well,
I don't know.
mean,
I don't hear good things about 2 and 3, but I don't know. What do you think? Have you seen the other
I don't
two?
remember the third one. In fact,
Was there a third one?
I don't think there was a third one.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, yeah.
Two's pretty good.
Okay.
Two's pretty good. It's not as good as the original by any means, but it's like a continuation of the story with the same characters. So it's got its merits for sure. And it's a little sillier, but it's not nearly to the just like over the top nature of the 2016 Ghostbusters.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it was also funny because all the moments I knew that were going to come like as we were viewing this movie, like like the cats and dogs, the complete pandemonium line. We came, we saw, we kicked their A. Just all those or like, oh man, the supervisor's gonna be ticked. Like all those moments, like I've known out of context throughout my whole life. When they came in, like when they like popped on the screen, it was like just as funny as like if it was like the first time I ever heard of it. You know, it was really just thoroughly enjoyable movie. So with that, I think I don't know about watching the other ones, but I had a good time. Good time. Are there any movies like from the 80s specifically, David, you have not yet seen, but you are interested in viewing? Like what's on your list?
What's on my list?
What's on your Letterboxd account?
I actually, man, I can't think of any right now.
Have you watched Legend? Or
No.
was it Legendary with Tom Cruise?
No, I haven't.
That's one on my list I want to watch.
You know what? You know what one I wanted to watch? I started watching, but I didn't finish it, was The Firm with Tom Cruise.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah.
That's a good
Where
movie.
Wilford Brimley is the head of security.
Yes. And it's funny because right now Tom Cruise is as old as Wilford Brimley was in that movie.
Oh my God.
And it's like, yeah, it's a totally different person. And I mean, one person had Scientology and the other one didn't. We'll just say about that in terms of aging, you know. But yeah, we got to sit down and watch it. It's a fun romp. It's a good movie and a really good score that's really unique and all that. So anyway, David, today I want to kind of bring to the topic of this. Oh, let me explain what we're doing here. Well, this is the Snarp Fangle podcast, everybody. Every week we come to the mics and we bring to the table of congregation of you guys who are listening a topic of interest that we want to discuss. And that topic today, for me, is the current and future state of the video game industry. So before I get started here, David, I just want to preface this is something I am very much as a hobby, not just playing games, but listening to podcasts, researching, looking at video game news websites, and just have a very large interest in the video game industry and just the going-ons of what ensues. And so I'd like to start out by saying that it's really fun to speculate, and it's always a good time for myself and others as well. And with this discussion, there will be a lot of speculation going forward. So just be prepared for that. But also, I'll be providing info that will be linked in the description of this podcast. So I also want to preface by saying that plans change. Things we're going to talk about today are subject to change, whether it be hardware, software, or just industry direction in general. And it's all subject to change. And hopefully with the leadership of these companies, they can make the right decisions to keep these industries going. And I am talking about big and small entities here. Also, as well, I want to talk about just really briefly the layoffs that are happening in the industry. There's a time during the early 2020s here that we're in where a lot of investment and attention was put into the games industry, especially on the stock market and with these publicly traded companies. And we see things like the meteoric rise of Fortnite from even the meteoric rise that it had before the 2020s to what it was then during COVID, as well as tons of other video games and projects and live service games. So you had a ton of investment and it was just a bubble. And as people went back to work throughout the years and the industry started to get more of a current line instead of just a spike that goes to the top, you kind of are seeing right now that whole bubble burst. And with the economy and the insanely terrible economy we are in the world, the companies are doing everything they can to stay profitable, and one of those is definitely layoffs. Now, that's not going to save them in the long term. That's just going to save them for a couple of quarters. So they really got to hanker down and really look at this and kind of manage their spending and what their investments are into instead of just firing people for the sake of it in terms of saving money. But yeah, I just want to acknowledge that it really sucks that a lot of people, we had over 10,000 layoffs in the first 3 months of 2024 here. And it's really sad, really unfortunate. So I want to bring that up because now I'm going to jump over to the corporate side of things. So strap on in. So I like to start by saying that it's important to look at the informative, albeit extremely boring, quarterly financial reports to determine what the current or near future state of the industry is. as well as the companies we'll be discussing today, including Microsoft, who makes Xbox, Sony, who makes PlayStation, and Nintendo, as well as some others along the way. The reason I bring up the financial reports is because it dictates a lot of the direction that these companies go in, since they are reliant on the investment of their shareholders. And even though the quarterly reports are extremely boring, I honestly can't even comprehend like half of the stuff that's in this, like, and with all the numbers and graphs and all that kind of thing, let alone like going through the actual data that people have to go through to make these presentations. So it's just very over my head in a lot of ways. But those reports are a major factor of business decisions, especially when trying to make money off of the company as well as like keeping it healthy. I recently took a look at actually Sony's quarterly reports from last year, and like their ROI is sinking like lower and lower and lower. Like we're in the single digits. I think it was 8.4%. I could be wrong on that. It was in, single percentage here, and that's dangerous for some investors that are looking at that for them. So yeah, we're seeing that lower percentage, and they're going to be changing direction in terms of business in a lot of different ways. Why, you ask? Well, we'll get to that soon, but first we need to remember these reports are data plus presentations that are displayed to the shareholders to keep them informed about the state of the company. And with that data, they can choose whether to discuss and suggest changes and communicate with the board and CEO to enact those changes. With those shareholders in mind, just like with any publicly traded company, the direction and strategy of the corporation are subject to the shareholders and investors on the market. And of course, many decisions are going to be made to keep the company going, to stay profitable. There are many times we look at games and the games industry, or the gaming industry. I'm not talking about gambling, by the way. I'm talking about video games, y'all. And most of the time we think we can change the company and make better decisions instead of those in charge. If only we could, make the decisions. If only we were in their shoes, the shoes of those that ran, the whole thing, who ran the show. Then big things could happen. But what people forget is there are no dictators running the show. There are many factors, but those factors are actually people. I'm talking about the board of directors, the shareholders, the data collectors, the market analysts, the employees, payroll, upkeep, investment, partnerships, buyouts, as well as the fear or delight of consolidation, depending on the perspective of each of those parties. And after all of that, we then get to like the CEO, David, like the guy who's they put in charge of the company. So if you think, why doesn't this company invest in this or go do that or break this partnership or just make cool games? It's because as CEO, there are so many things you need to do and people to please, to manage, talk to, bargain with, as well as relationships to keep up, whether it be person to person or company to company. It involves immaculate people skills and finesse. I mean, it involves when to strike down an idea, when to uplift one, when to break a relationship, and when to foster one, when to adhere solely to the board, and when to make the call as CEO. Those who run these companies have lots to do to keep it alive. That goes with all these companies and not just the video games industry. And I'm almost done with the corporate stuff. One more little thing here. And honestly, for me, that is why leadership is so important. I mean, imagine if like you or me were leading one of these companies or you listening, like there's so much you have to balance. And there's so like, I can't even imagine being in that position. Like, yeah, you're getting paid like out the nose, but every day you're going in and you're dealing with that. And I'm not saying like every CEO is a hardworking person, but the amount of like stress I can imagine they have to deal with is kind of like, is pretty insane.
Well, there's one thing too that like people don't understand what CEOs do.
Yeah.
It's like, sure, they're not out, in the sun digging holes all day, and sometimes those of us who do more labor-focused jobs may be resentful of the idea that you can, sit in the office all day, make calls, make emails, do whatever, and get paid more money than most people will ever make in their lifetimes.
Yeah.
But the idea is it's just a different world. And in order to be successful in that world, you have to live, breathe, eat, sleep your job. Like a normal 8-hour, 5 days a week kind of job. You go there, you put in your hours, you go home, you come back the next day, you put in your hours. And so there's a clear delineation between work time and personal time. When you're a CEO or a big executive in a company, that delineation no longer exists. At all time, every time, all of your time is company time. And if it strains your family relationships, if it means you're not getting enough sleep, if it means you're developing psychological issues even, then that's just the cost of playing in that world.
And I would actually recommend, like, there are very little forms of media you can listen to that are, well, at least from what I've seen, I'm sure there's many out there, but there are very few like examples of actual CEOs giving like an honest, genuine interview that's not like media trained heavily or somebody that is just their friend interviewing them. There's very few of those out there. What I would recommend is people go to the Iron Lords podcast on YouTube. You can just type them up, and they have an interview. They do a live stream every Sunday, and they, it's a podcast, but they also do interviews. And one of the interviews they did, David, was a guy named Peter Moore. He was the CEO of Sega of America for like a very long time. I mean, he was CEO into the Dreamcast era and, the Dream Crash, as we want to call it, as we come to call it. And it was really interesting to hear his perspective on it and how he came in during the Saturn time, and just he goes through and talks about all of his experience of leading a company and going from that to, like, I think he was at Xbox for a long time. No, yes, he was at Xbox for quite a bit. He then went to EA, and just, it was really, really cool to listen to that. And he was very genuine. And he's also to the point in his life where he's like, yeah, I don't really care what I like divulge. Like, I'm just going to say like my experience as it was. And, he was, obviously he was, a kind, he wanted to keep relationships. So, there's definitely probably spots you can pick out where, like, at least when I was listening to it, like, there was like people he wanted to talk about, but he's like, whatever. It was just like a long time ago. Like, I'm not going to go into the details of, that kind of thing, or if he didn't like somebody. But the point of it is that it was really cool because this was a guy that's now like back in his home country and doing like soccer, in our terms, soccer stuff. And as in leading that kind of industry, because that's like his passion. And it's like it was really cool to see. They did it over 2 different Sundays. So it's like a total of like probably 3 hours of this guy talking and them interviewing him. And it was such a great example of like seeing somebody being genuine and happy about their business. And the guys on the podcast did a wonderful job interviewing this guy. So, and that podcast actually kind of really like spoke to me, where I'm like, oh wow, it's definitely so much different than what I could have imagined of what position like that the CEO is in, or the leadership of companies, and how to manage all these like people, as well as like, you don't want to fire people. You want to keep people paid. But some companies out there, especially right now, are just trying to just let go as much as they can, or they feasibly can, to stay profitable, because that's where their stock market price is going to come from. So with that, I think that ends our corporate discussion here. So let's get into the consumer side of things, David. So I'm going to do a really quick overview of like some gaming history, and then we're going to a deep dive into the last 10 years. You ready? Let's go. All right. So obviously, back in the day, we had the Atari. It ran itself into the ground, crashed the industry. NES came along. Cool. Awesome. Brought it back. Gaming was back. And then America and Japan were like, we need more competition with Nintendo because we need to get into that market. So Sega comes in, and we have a whole book you can go read called Console Wars about that whole feud, and in the 80s and 90s and so on. You then had Nintendo being like, whoa, Sega's really like on our butt. Let's go to PlayStation and kind of partner with a CD kind of a form factor, and let's do the Nintendo PlayStation. And a guy named Ken Kutaragi, who was developing that console, was like very surprised when it turns out those two companies clashed and they didn't want to do it anymore, and they wanted to scrap the project. Ken Kutaragi saved the scraps of the PlayStation design, went to the board at Sony, and he miraculously, after working like many nights within a week, like very long nights of ironing out this concept and the design and the hardware side of things, he went to the board and miraculously got it approved, and thus we know as the PlayStation is today. So we have that. We have Doom and coming out in the 90s, and it was awesome. A successor to Wolfenstein 3D and id Software, and that just made a boom in the games industry in terms of the PC side of things. It was always there, but there we go for that. We then have the Game Boy, the birth of portable, or the mainstream birth of portable gaming. that Nintendo brings into the fray. We then have the N64 and PS1 and that whole thing and the childhoods that were made during that time and where we are today. We then have Valve starting up and setting things up. A couple guys left Microsoft, built this company in Seattle, and then created Half-Life, another evolution of PC gaming. You seem like you have something to say, David.
Do I?
So if you want to interject, dude, just go for it. So anyway, you have Valve come in. PC gaming will never be the same afterward. Sega comes dream crashing out of the market, Y2K'ing itself out of existence. You have the PS2 launching in the year 2000. You have Xbox replacing Sega on the market and partners with them as well. You then have the birth of Xbox Live and online gaming into the mainstream during that generation. You then transition into 360 and PS3, the seventh console generation, along with the Wii. You see Sony embarrassing themselves on stage, live in front of so many people. Xbox releasing their console in 2005. Sony releasing it in 2006 with $100, I think it was $200 in price difference, which was just the PS3. You can look up that No Clip Documentaries did a bunch of archival footage they got a hold of, and they uploaded like full res HD versions of these like E3 and keynote presentations from like in the 2000s and stuff. Just a bunch of like old like tapes and CD and DVDs they got a hold of, and it's like really cool to see. So if you want to go have like a couple drinks and go watch that Sony presentation from 2006, it's an embarrassment. So yeah, we have Sony doing that. They fall back in the race of consoles. Xbox goes ahead. Sony eventually catches up to them and sells eventually more PS3s than 360s by the end of that generation. Or I think the final numbers were like in 2012, 2013, 2015, one of those years. And Sony, did sell more PS3s in the end versus the 360s. So it was very interesting. And of course, during that time, we had the mobile boom, the phone market, and kind of it settling where it is today. So with that, let's dive into the 8th console generation. But before we do, David, is there anything that pops out to you in that list that you would like to talk about or stands out to you in any way?
No, just it's interesting how things rise and fall. You have the companies that were so dominant one period are virtually non-existent in another period. You know, you had the console wars of Nintendo versus Sega, and then fast forward to the Xbox 360 and PS3 generation, and Sega is basically nothing, and Nintendo is lagging far behind them. Well, with the exception of the handheld market, they've always dominated that market.
And still do today.
Yes.
At this time, which we will get into later. Okay, so into the 8th console generation we go. This is kind of like Jake's perspective of the last 10 or 14 years, so get ready. All right, so we've seen a lot in the last decade of gaming. We had the Wii U come out in 2012, prematurely starting the 8th console generation. We had a Nintendo...
Very premature.
Very premature. We had a Nintendo that was so focused on risk and relying on past Wii U ownership to openly accept that risk, and they go out and they fail and they get demolished in terms of adoption of their console, mainly because of extremely poor communication to literally every party that they were dealing with. And in doing so, they lost both the general audience and hardcore gamers, as well as game devs who didn't want to make games for the honestly confusing and underpowered hardware that Nintendo brought to the market. And so they just ran their business off the Wii money from the prior generation and tried to develop a successor to the Wii U immediately to prevent themselves from going out of business, which probably would have happened if the Switch, or NX as it was referred to at the time, before releasing, if it wasn't a massive success come 2017, they probably would have not exist today, maybe. But they had a lot of money in the Wii gen, so, who knows? In fact, at one point in the Wii U's lifespan, it was speculated from pundits at the time that platforms like Xbox and PlayStation that Nintendo would go third party and sell their games on those platforms. I remember hearing about those discussions, and that was fun to speculate. or maybe even go out to the console space, get out of the console space altogether, like their old competitor Sega. But from the success of the Nintendo Wii and the console selling over 101 million units, that's insane. I would imagine it would take just, one more bad generation for them. In the following year, 2013, was the biggin. We had the next release of consoles for both Microsoft and Sony, with the Xbox One and PS4 respectively. Xbox was out the gate at 500 bones, relying on the past customers of 360, while at the same time betting on corporate foresight that all digital was the future. They were eventually right, but as we all know, those who arrived to the party early, David, have to help set things up. And in this case, Xbox had to do that and do the dishes. Because PS4 came out the gate, it made the call to reverse similar decisions they were going to make along with the Xbox, but they did a reversal. So they're like, okay, that was bad. We're going to take those out of there and make them look even worse. And with the public backlash on the potential digital-only future, always on DRM, and not being able to share their games, even physical copies, Sony made the correct call and set the price of the PS4 to $400 and showed the public through a 21-second video that you can share your PS4 games as well, physically. There's actually this video out there. I don't know if David, do you remember this video? Of them, it was, I think it was Yuhei Yoshida and Adam Boyes, who were leaders in Sony at the time. And they basically had the PlayStation intro come up. They said how to play your games, and they handed the game to each other, and the video was over. Do you remember? What? You never seen this?
I never saw that.
You can look it up. It's like how to share your PS4 games. It's from 2013. It's hilarious. It's so funny.
Well, that's the interesting thing. It was it wasn't as bad as some people were speculating it was going to be, but it was just at the same time, the idea that instead of just popping your game in and playing it, you had to install it first, and then you had to download updates and stuff. That was a big leap for people.
Yeah.
Because consoles before this generation there was a huge gulf between them and the world of PC gaming.
Mm-hmm.
And now all of a sudden, what you had was this console generation going do. Now it's being somewhere in the middle of a PC and the consoles of yore. It's somewhere in the middle in terms of what's required of you as the end user to play your games and to operate them. And so just the idea that such a leap had never been made. I mean, things like that had been tried in the past, to limited extent, but it had never been, fully realized. So the consumers at large were like, what is this?
Yeah, it was such a culture shock, a shell shock for a lot of people that they're like, what is this, But I think it's a lot of I think it's corporate oversight and trying to predict the market. And honestly, they were correct. They saw where the market was going and they tried to introduce it at a very early time that people were they didn't want any part of it. I think it was just it was just difficult in general for people to get used to that. And we eventually did, it's how it is today. But imagine you're popping a 360 disc into the console. You don't have to update it. The disc just runs off of it. And then you get the Xbox One. It has to update. It has to go to the latest OS. You then pop the discs in and it installs it. And it maybe downloads an update. And then you can play. And then, maybe you're not connected to the internet right. All this stuff fell together. So the 7th generation was really the last gen. You could really just pop a disc in and have it work, or any kind of media like cartridge or whatever. I should, outside of the handheld market, we'll just say that.
Yeah, outside of the handheld market. And that generation was actually my last generation for trying to keep up with the console market. I actually kind of fell off of gaming a little bit at the end of that generation. So personally for me, it's a very big boundary point in the development of gaming as a whole, because that's where I'm like, you know what? like consoles are starting to become more like computers, and I'm already not having as much time for gaming as I did when I was younger. I'm out.
Well, I think that you bring up something interesting there. Like you're like, yeah, I don't want to deal with this. I'm kind of out of it. I'm curious to see like people who purchase, like if you could get statistics on people who purchased consoles throughout the years, like specific people, like did people such as you who kind of got out of it, did they go into the Nintendo Switch because of the offline capabilities, because of the simplicity of the concept? I mean, yeah, you have a console that, updates like every other console and updates their games and OS and all that. But I wonder if the reason Nintendo is coming to 150 million units of Switches being sold before the successor even comes out, I'm curious to know if part of that success is the simplicity and the simplicity that Nintendo brings to the market, honestly.
I mean, this is all speculation on my part, but I would say yes. I would say that the Switch picked up a large portion of the market that was put off by the direction that Microsoft and Sony were going in. Because, I mean, I'm sitting there looking at an Xbox One right now, and that thing is a monstrosity.
It's an old VCR looking bad thing.
It's like, holy crap. I mean, even the old PS2, like before the redesign, the Xbox 360 caught a lot of flack for being
Those
bulky.
Those things were ugly, man.
Yeah, bulky and ugly looking. And now it's like we're getting to the point where these consoles look like they're trying to be, computer towers.
Yeah, just look at the PS5 and just I remember seeing the PS5 physically for the first time, and I'm like, oh my God, that thing's a monster. It's the biggest console I've literally ever seen. Like, it's huge. And like they've done like a redesign, but it's like still, it's a monster. Jeez. And it also kind of looks ugly too. Like it's got like this V-shaped design. It's like weird. Huh? Oh, it's just my fans and my computer.
Oh,
okay. I was like, you're like, huh?
I'm having a little bit of a moment here. I'm like, this is high-pitched whining noise.
High-pitched whining noise.
I'm like, did something just turn on?
The Nintendo ninjas revving up their snipers. Ah! The Nintendo ninjas are going to get you. Okay, let's get back to it. Okay, so so Sony came out of E3 2013 with both hands up, flipping chickens as they walked down the red carpet out of the party, heading into a very successful holiday season and generation with the public on their side, and Xbox was left to do damage control and clean up after the party. So as the console generation went on, the main discussion was this. One was waiting excitedly for the next Sony release first-party game like Bloodborne or Uncharted 4 and whenever The Last of Us 2 is going to come out. You had Xbox trying desperately to gain market control through very consumer-friendly choices and practices. I remember the E3, they did a lot of reversal stuff, and I'm like, okay, that's better. And every E3, it got better and better and better, but it was never to the extent of like where we want it to be. I remember when they announced the backwards compatibility program, and that was like huge. And yeah, the implementation's kind of like convoluted, but it worked. And you're like, okay, I could see this getting better. So they had a ton of different, avenues of trying to get people on their side versus Nintendo with the Wii U, who like refused to do any of that and refused to try to gain people's goodwill and just stuck to their guns. I think personally, because Nintendo is, as I look over my shoulder to see if there's a Nintendo Ninja, I think they're very prideful, David. I think they're far up their own butt, to be quite frank, in many of the business practices and ways that they do. It might having to do because of culturally where they are, or having to do with just they're just so proud of their lineage because they are 100 years old.
Yeah,
they've come so far.
When you're running a company that started in the the late 1800s,
yeah,
you're gonna have and all of your competitors started within the last 50 years. You're gonna have you're gonna have a little bit of a kind of a look down through your nose at your competitors kind of a thing.
Yeah, and I'm not saying Nintendo had like bad leadership or anything. I mean, Satoru Iwata is like legendary. I mean, I remember during that time with the Wii U like failing miserably and like failing all kinds of expectations that any of the companies had, as well as the 3DS coming out the gate with a more expensive kind of price and them kind of having to lower that price and just losing a lot of customers during that time. It was kind of like sobering to see Nintendo be like, yeah, we're going to take a step back. Satoru Iwata kind of came out, and he's famous for this, where he came out and he took a pay cut and he wanted to make sure people didn't lose their jobs. It was very very amazing to see. But again, they kind of just refused to kind of try to appeal to hardcore gamers. But honestly, they were in a tight place. It was hard for them to do any goodwill because they were kind of stuck with what they had with the Wii U. So yeah, it was just an unfortunate situation. And yeah, they did no change to save themselves, unfortunately. But what can you do with something like the Wii U? So anyway, we had an amazing decade of games from 2013 to 2020, this generation from both Microsoft and Sony. But when all was said and done and the fat lady sang, Sony came out on top and sold a staggering 117 million units in 10 years, which was last updated in September 2023. And Xbox never actually released info about their console number sales until like literally last year, David. And that number is 58 million in 10 years. So literally half of what Sony's console was. And you might be wondering, what about Nintendo? What about the Wii U? How much did they sell? They only sold 13.56 million. And that was as of December 2019. And we'll just call it a day from there.
Yeah, I don't think anybody bought a Wii U after 2019.
If you're interested to see like the absolute abysmal state of Nintendo and their strategy in terms of marketing or trying to get people on their side, just go watch Scott the Woz on YouTube, because he's obsessed with the Wii U for some reason. He owns every Wii U game, and he's done a retrospective that's like in 2 parts right now, and it's like 4 hours long already. And it's like him like going through year by year of Nintendo's releases, strategy, and just all kinds of craziness.
Yeah, that begs the question, is anyone interested enough in the Wii U to dive into someone else's obsession with the Wii U?
It's a fun train wreck to see, I'll be honest. But yeah, it's a lot to ask for somebody about a console that's just dead. It's like watching an 8-hour documentary from Ken Burns about the Sega Saturn, basically. I'd watch that. I watch Ken Burns' documentary on like the 80s and the 90s gaming stuff. That'd be kind of cool, but I don't think.
Maybe not 8 hours.
Maybe not 8 hours. I mean, So anyway, the main thing I want to point out is during the 360 and PS3 generation and into the 8th console generation, we had people buying digital games and actually being able to carry those over. Well, mostly. Like, if you bought anything on the Wii U Virtual Console or the Wii U Virtual Console or the even 3DS, DSi, you're shit out of luck, partner. Sorry, all those games are stuck on those systems. Except you can't transfer anything with the exception of your Pokédex for some reason. I don't know why, but if you go out and buy a Game Boy, buy Pokemon Red, play it, you can transfer that. In the current day, you can transfer nearly all of that up to the 3DS. And if you know and finagle your way past the closure of the eShop on the 3DS, you can actually carry those further, by soft modding your 3DS as well. So it's really fascinating that the Pokemon Company was investing in developing technology and Nintendo allowing them to do so, but not actual games you used your money for. Like, what? It blows my mind. Anyway, if you bought an Xbox One or PS4 day one, and you eventually got access to some or most of your digital purchases from the 360 and PS3, whether it be Xbox through Xbox's backwards compatibility program or PlayStation's PS1 Classics, Xbox did a much better job, in my opinion, on this than PlayStation. They actually did release like PS2 ports, like of the GTA games, and like some other ones, like I think Star Wars Bounty Hunter was for some reason one of those games. I have no idea why. Maybe like Sony had some money in that or something. I don't know. But now it's like all streaming services, including like Nintendo, Sony, and as well as Xbox, if you want to go and place old stuff. But the Xbox is really the only thing I believe, unless you repurchase your games on the current modern stuff, that you can like bring over. And it's unfortunate to see that. And as we go into the 9th console generation, all your purchases, for the most part, I mean, stuff delists and whatnot, but you can still download it. Most of your purchases are going to be able to carry over, like 100%. Like there's no saying. If you like bought an Xbox day one, digital purchases, they'll all carry over to the next Xbox. Same thing with PS4 and PS5, with a very minuscule exception, like maybe 10 games. So you're fine. So now, if only there was, David, let me ask you this. If only there was a platform that you could carry over all your digital purchases and libraries.
Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah. Wouldn't it be fascinating? Let's talk about PC gaming, David. Let's do this. So during the 2010s, I'm just going to start there. We had Steam rise into the meteoric success, gaining massive numbers from PC gaming, gaining more traction as the PS4 and Xbox One they quickly became defeated in terms of price to performance ratio. Like within the first 6 months of release of those consoles, you could take that money that you would have spent on an Xbox One or PS4, and you could go and put that money into a PC, and in terms of PC parts, and build a PC with better performance and roughly the same price if you budget right. And it happened within the first 6 months. It was crazy. Like it was like you could get the same performance for the same price, and it just got better and better as the years wore on. On a personal note, this is when I got into PC gaming, since I couldn't afford a console at the time. I was able to get a cheap old system with an Intel Core 2 Duo, and I got a mid-range graphics card. And I went ahead and I built a decent gaming computer. And as the years wore on, I got better parts, upgraded stuff, more storage, et cetera. And now I'm here where I am today. But yeah, I eventually also scored an Xbox One like way later, like 2018, 17, something like that, as well as like a PS4 Pro later on as well. But as the 2010s wore on, Valve, the company behind Half-Life, Portal, Counter-Strike, Team Fortress, kept breaking records of concurrent users on Steam. It seems like every winter sale in the 2010s, you get a big, huge, massive spike in concurrent players. I mean, I don't have the numbers right here, but it was this year, I think it was over 60 million people, which is insane, like users worldwide. So Steam was wrecking in the dome, man, and others like EA and Ubisoft saw that and they wanted to get in on that pie. So you had them release their launchers during that time. You had Blizzard actually releasing their Battle.net stuff in 98, but then relaunching it, I should say, as Battle.net 2.0 in 2009. And you had Valve create Steam in 04, which is right in between that. We then had EA and Ubisoft coming to the fold and releasing their own respective launchers with the ability to sell their own PC games. And Epic Games releasing their launcher come 2018, and Fortnite ensuing after that. Valve also partnered with a few hardware manufacturers to make Steam machines, where the concept was basically a console-like computer aimed for living room use. They didn't have much success, but Valve's hardware desires carry on today with the recent release of the Valve Steam Deck, a piece of hardware similar to that on the Nintendo Switch, with the wonderful with the ability to carry over your Steam library with many concessions, but there's a lot of options for you to play your PC games on there, especially modern titles. But for example, if you bought Half-Life 2 back in 04 and you download it to a PC today, or even your Steam Deck, you can play that on there and it carries over. And also, as PC gaming grew in the last several years, it's gained a lot of acceptance as well as normalization among the general audience. So just more and more people are getting exposed to it. By the time the major console manufacturers released their console refresh during this, it was 2016 and 17 respectively, with the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, PC gaming was getting to such large amounts that people were curious if the market was going to be overtaken by that kind of thing. It all turned out to not be true, with the boom of crypto mining and just PC hardware parts fluctuating up and down and up and down. It rose as high as the Roman Empire's influence of the world, and fell down harder than the body of Japan's most recent prime minister. Speaking of Japan, David, as the 2010s wore on, it seemed that the gaming industry was booming. Consoles were selling well, PC gaming was on the rise, and something was on the way. Nintendo's next console. Codenamed the NX, Nintendo was reportedly working on a console/handheld hybrid. They were to infuse the two markets they had been a part of since the creation of the handheld market that Nintendo pretty much created and fostered back with like the old Game & Watch stuff, as well as like, I think they even manufactured calculators for businessmen back in the day. So, and they put little games on them and stuff like that. But anyway, no, I'm sorry. I'm getting my facts mixed up. The inspiration of the Game Boy was based on a businessman in a train bopping on his calculator, like just bored. And the guy like who made the Game Boy, I think his name was Gunpei Yokoi. He went ahead and he saw that and he's like, oh, what if he like has a little thing to play a little game on? And then thus the Game & Watch handhelds were created and then eventually the Game Boy. So pretty interesting. So the Nintendo Switch was revealed in October 2016 and released in March 2017. It came as an immediate surprise to both the casual and hardcore gamers with a form factor that hadn't been seen before. A console equivalent experience on the go. The device, let's see, where am I? Oh, the device Nintendo had been cooking since the downfall of the Wii U was an instant success. With hardware that wasn't even as powerful as an Xbox One, Nintendo made the platform easy to develop for developers, as well as promised to gamers their library would carry over going forward. And of course, spectacular first-party support. We had Breath of the Wild, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Super Mario Odyssey was released in the first 6 months of the launch. Craziness. Nintendo was back, and no one could have predicted the Nintendo Switch would sell a whopping 139.36 million Nintendo Switch consoles that have been shipped as of December 31st, 2023. So let me be clear. They shipped 139 million units as of the end of last year. That's insane. That's bonkers. Will they sell those eventually? I could bet so. We're going to get into the future of Nintendo in just a second here. So as we note today, Nintendo has established their own timeline of releasing their own hardware outside of Xbox and Sony. So that was in 2017. Okay. And from what it looks like, it seems that Nintendo will continue to do the same, as we will discuss, which also might become true for another hardware manufacturer, but all in due time. With the release of the PS5 and the Xbox Series X and S in November 2020, the console scene got introduced to extremely fast load times through fast M.2 SSDs. So like load times were kind of eliminated or shortened to like a couple seconds. A feature that has been part of the PC ecosystem for years at this point, but with the consoles adapting it, came also to the market a requirement for cheap and fast storage, which played a factor in the prices of SSDs coming down dramatically in the last couple of years, as well as the optimization for SSDs in the massive general like console space, so that games on PC can also take advantage of that. When developers are like making for console, they could also like optimize it for SSDs on PC, because now more games are requiring those as a like base level. So here we are, a place where the industry is starting to look toward the future. David, before we get into, we're going to go company by company here and take a look at, reports, rumors, speculation of the future. But before we go to that, does anything stand out to you in anything I've said recently, and just pick at any thread you want? Anything in particular?
No, I think I'm ready to move on to what the future holds.
All right, well, let's get into the future. Let's start off with Nintendo. With 2024 being the Switch's 8th year on the market, which is kind of unprecedented, all eyes have been on Nintendo the last few years, wondering when will we get a Switch 2 or a Super Switch or whatever they decide to call it. The release is imminent, but what was recently thought to be a September 2024 release has been shifted, according to reports that say that Nintendo has pushed the Nintendo Switch, the Switch 2's launch to March 2025. The reasons? The reports say that the reasoning behind Nintendo's moving of dates has to do with Nintendo needing extra time to polish first-party titles, but also make sure they manufacture enough consoles for release. Okay. But developers state the real reason they are delaying it is because they want to sell off the last reserves of the Switch consoles, as well as they're still selling pretty well. Like, it's going down over time, but they're still selling a great degree that they just want to have another year on the market, and that just gives them more time to prepare for the next one. So that's basically what's happening here, with Nintendo anticipating one more holiday season of Switch being the only Nintendo console on the market by this time next year in 2025, David. We should have an excellent idea of how Nintendo's new console looks, plays, and what games we will see. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Nintendo's actually doing a smart thing here because the Switch is really a resounding success. Like, in terms of just overtaking the market, it's phenomenal how well it's sold. And even though other companies have moved on with new hardware, updated processors, and the PC gaming market is always moving forward as new hardware comes out. So the Switch has lagged behind in that department because it's kind of a old console at this point. And yet, despite that, them lagging behind in terms of hardware, which was kind of what killed them in the previous couple generations, like the Switch is still going strong, So really, I think it's a solid move here just to try and ride that wave out for another year before they try and introduce new hardware to the market.
Yeah, I mean, I think by this time next year, we'll also get a good idea of where those numbers are in terms of sales. I think I wouldn't be surprised if we get 150 million by the year's end, like after it's all said and done. And then we get the anticipated Switch 2 or whatever they call it. I think it's going to be interesting because their avenue of last generation was revealed in October the year prior and then released in that March afterward. I'm curious to see if they're going to do any kind of announcement come October, because that's like in the middle of the holiday season or just before it. And that might just deter people, be like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to wait for the next thing, or I'm not going to buy a Switch because I know it's in the pipeline. I mean, we've kind of known this has been happening the last literally 2 to 3 years. The console hardware, according to a guy on YouTube I follow, his name, he's an insider with a lot of different PC tech companies. According to Moore's Law is Dead on YouTube, he actually, it's called, I don't remember the Switch name, but the Switch's hardware has been finalized since 2022. And that's when people were theorizing, oh, it's going to be 2023. Here we go. And they're like, oh, it's going to be 2024. Here we go. And now it's like, okay, looks like it's actually going to be 2025 when it's all said and done. But also something you mentioned was the hardware power. So the hardware, did you know, I didn't know this until, well, I knew this when the talk was happening, but Nintendo, the hardware inside the Switch is as old as 2014. It's like a similar comparison. Nearly the exact same chip that's used in the Nintendo Switch was used in the NVIDIA Shield, like kind of living room console thing that they released in that time. And that chip's been around a long time, and Nintendo's gotten like pretty much every little bit of juice they can out of that processor. And so now they're moving on to the next gen. My worry is the power. So theoretically, the power that we're hearing from this new Switch and the hardware that's inside it could potentially be as powerful as a PS4. So that's, it's older hardware. It's not as powerful, obviously, but you have to lower down that power to keep a portable form factor, which makes sense. But I'm worried because I'm like, is it going to be adequate? Because as we're going to get to later, like looking toward the future, there are other people who are going to be developing handheld systems with far superior power compared to a PS4, or maybe just even a little bit more. So I'm just curious if Nintendo's kind of just shooting themselves in the foot with the power. Another aspect is, are they going to kind of pull a Nintendo and do something weird? Like, here's this new Nintendo Switch with an AR experience and a social media side. It's like, I like, here's Miiverse coming back. I don't know what they're going to do, but it's like, are they going to like pull a Nintendo? What do you think?
Yeah, it's because
Nintendo's really good at screwing over themselves.
Really, they are. I think they've learned from the Wii and Wii U that so I don't necessarily foresee anything super off the wall coming out, but the problem that I foresee is, you talked about Nintendo's pride earlier, and I see Nintendo's pride potentially shooting them in the foot, in that they don't realize that other companies are looking to capitalize upon the success of the Switch and are going to be developing their own sort of living room handheld hybrid systems that are going to be much more powerful than the Switch, much more capable. And I can easily see Nintendo just kind of like, oh yeah, we're going to release this Switch 2 and it's going to be a serious step behind all the other competition. And we're not going to acknowledge that it's behind all the other competition because we're Nintendo and we're better than all of them.
Yeah, and to be fair, like Nintendo has had like extremely old hardware in the Switch for a very long time. I mean, the chip in there is about 10 years old at this point. So like obviously you don't need power to be successful. Like that's not what people are obviously looking for. I mean, there obviously are people looking for it, but not in like when you're trying to capture people on an idea. And what Nintendo did with the Switch is they captured it and simplified this idea that's so tangible. And I think that's the reason it's sold so much. It's because families and kids and even people of all ages can really just look at that and kind of grasp it like, oh, okay. And you could just pick it up. Wow, that's neat. You know, so I wonder how they're going to handle that with this next one. Is it going to be same? Is it going to be just more powerful? I mean, we really just don't know at this point. But
that's really the thing that I'm kind of like, or that kind of gives me pause about it is I can easily see Nintendo just kind of like, oh yeah, we're just going to like capitalize on the massive success of the Switch and release some sort of half-assed sort of like, you know, incremental upgrade to the Switch rather than something that's actually, you know, leaps and bounds ahead that's truly next generation, you know. But this time around, they're not going to be the only players in the game.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that in just a second here, but I think, yeah, again, the hardware is interesting, but also like the strategy as well. Like you're saying, like, what's Nintendo? Are they going to pull Nintendo, man? Like, they're really bad at this. I will say on the other side of that, like, idea that Nintendo has played it pretty safe with the Switch in terms of like just strategy, I would say. Like they've been really smart and business wise and not have been like the Nintendo Labo. Did you ever hear about that? It's like basically like a kit of cardboard box like parts you buy and you can build like an AR, VR glasses with it. Then you put the Switch into it. You can build a little racetrack and race Mario Kart people in its AR experience. Like really weird stuff like that. But that's like very, very niche. And it's gotten the attention that belongs with a niche product. So it's not very popular. So, but that's the like kind of remnants I feel like that we've gotten like with the Nintendo Wii U, where that's gone. Also, the leader of Nintendo, the CEO, current one right now, is Shuntaro Furukawa, and he's been there since 2018 with the passing of Satoru Iwata. And with Furukawa, this guy is a very, very prominent businessman, very smart, and he's been leading since 2018. And he's done, I think, a pretty phenomenal job in terms of like managing this company, as well as like the Nintendo Switch is so successful, David, with a market and industry that is plagued with layoffs. Nintendo is like one of the only companies that has had 0 layoffs. 0. That's just crazy. In fact, companies such as, I believe it was Capcom, are one of those other ones where they've had pretty much very little layoffs. In fact, they have raised prices of employee salaries in the last year or so, which is kind of crazy. But you have people like that in maybe Larian Studios, just to go off a side tangent, like with these companies that are a few examples of being super successful recently that aren't going to have to cut costs like that. But with Nintendo, going back to Nintendo, it's interesting because with this leadership from Furukawa and the current and having that go into the next one, him being part of the planning of the Switch 2 and leading into the Switch 2, I feel like there is a chance that we are not going to see Nintendo screw over themselves. I feel like he's prevented a lot of that. But again, you never know. Nintendo can be weird. And speaking of weirdness, let's talk about Microsoft. So Microsoft has gained a little bit of hope since the release of the Series X and S consoles in 2020, with console sales outpacing Xbox 360 in the same amount of time, but selling worse than Xbox One. So like during the same amount of time these consoles have been released, it sold better than the 360, but it sold worse than the Xbox One. So that kind of tells you also like back in the day, like why people were so like hammering down on Xbox, when in reality, the Xbox One was selling better than the 360 did during the same amount of time. And the 360 didn't have a PS3 to fight against. So it's like Xbox One sold better in general, but the Series X is kind of falling behind here. So it's kind of ebbs and flows, as you can see. So Microsoft resorted to... Oh, let's see, where am I here? Okay, Microsoft resorted to going to the service route in 2017 with Xbox Game Pass, a Netflix-like subscription for Xbox games with day one release of their first-party games on the service, as well as many other titles as an option. In addition to giving the option for gamers to stream games to devices like Xbox consoles, PC, and mobile, Xbox Game Pass has successfully was successful starting out. But Microsoft has had numbers start to flatline with the money they are investing into developing their first-party portfolio. So they're flatlining right now, and with the money they're putting into like the new current like games, such as the games like Avowed from Obsidian Games, Hellblade, which is coming out this spring, and Indiana Jones in the fall. Like that's a lot of money and a lot of projects they got going on, as well as what's happening in the future. And they're releasing them day one on Xbox Game Pass, a subscription service that's $16 a month. How are they making any money when in reality, most of the money from a game, when it has the potential to be profitable, is in the first few months of release? So with this strategy, Xbox has made a really cool like leg up against Sony, but in reality, as it's kind of like ironing out the money, where's the money going, and like how are they making return? How are they doing ROI, David? How are they getting return on investment? Like that's where I'm coming into question here. And a lot of pundits as well. I wouldn't call myself a pundit. I wouldn't call myself a retard, but anyway, if you're releasing a first party title on the subscription service, how can it be called profitable? But, oh, well, we'll see. We'll see what happens next. But anyway, Microsoft has made many acquisitions for the Xbox brand as well in the last few years. But the most recent purchase was Activision Blizzard King. The biggin, the tale of how Xbox purchased the company for nearly $75 billion with a capital B, which is the biggest entertainment purchase known to man at this point, is a whole story in itself that I won't go into here. But with this purchase, it's let Xbox gain access to studios responsible for games such as Call of Duty, Overwatch, Diablo, and properties like Crash Bandicoot, along with a ton of others as well that I won't get into here. But what is worth mentioning, though, is the fact that Microsoft has gained a lot in their purchase, but they are coming to the point where the ROI for this purchase, along with what we've already established with Game Pass, the ROI is not going to see the light of day for many, many, many years to come. And Microsoft obviously took this all into account, but it's like getting to the point where I can imagine they're getting desperate. And it's kind of been confirmed which is leading them to explore more unconventional ways of releasing their products, like releasing them on other platforms outside of the Xbox ecosystem, which is unheard of now. Well, not heard of now, but it's been unheard of since. So let me explain. It is speculated this is the reason why Microsoft is releasing games like Sea of Thieves, Grounded, Pentiment, and Hi-Fi Rush on PlayStation and Switch, in addition to Steam. They state that they are just releasing these 4 games, but it doesn't take much imagination that Xbox will have more drastic measures to get more people to buy their games, since they have, in a way, trained their customers to not purchase any of their titles, but instead sign up for Game Pass. One more thing on Xbox, and then we can iron this out. The future of Xbox's hardware is a speculation war right now, but it looks like they will be releasing a console refresh this fall in 2024, but having very little hardware change. We won't see anything like the transition from Xbox One to Xbox One X, but more like 360 to 360 Slim. So just a different look and maybe a little bit ironing out of some hardware stuff. An additional note is that this refresh is to have no disk drive this fall, with them going the adorably digital route. Another thing worth noting is that it is reported that Microsoft has the next console in the pipeline, and it might release sooner than expected, with 2026 being the year Microsoft is aiming for, with additional rumors flying around that they are investing resources into creating an Xbox portable console, not unlike the Steam Deck, which would be released in the next few years. What are your thoughts on this, David? Go whatever direction you want.
That would be highly intriguing. An Xbox Steam Deck, essentially, because I haven't messed around with the Steam Deck a whole lot. I've kind of stayed away from it. But it's a great idea, but it seems like the execution needs to be tightened up from what I can see on it. There's some it's more like a PC than it is like a console. You know, a lot of the work to get it running smoothly kind of falls on the consumer. So I could see if Microsoft could release something similar, but that had that plug and play console appeal, but with the ability for you to just bring in all your Xbox games of old and have them kind of migrate to one place. I think they could make a big impact on the industry doing that. But I mean, it remains to be seen whether they're going to do anything like that.
Yeah. Well, in the current market, I think it's interesting with handhelds right now because, yeah, you have the Steam Deck. You also have companies like Asus releasing the ROG Ally, which is like a Steam Deck, but just with Windows on it. And it's a bit more powerful, but it's also got Windows on it. And Windows is not made to be like a touchscreen interface, like at all.
No.
And so that's kind of a Achilles heel in that market right now. There are solutions in that specific device, like making a UI for it, but it's like you still have to go into Windows for a lot of things. Steam Deck, you don't really have to go outside of like the Steam ecosystem in terms of like going to the desktop or anything, unless you really want to get, nitty gritty with it. But if you just want to like download games, it's pretty nice, good experience. But again, like you said, not everything is like optimized for it. There are many things that won't run on it at all, such as Call of Duty, for example. Like the entire situation with that is borked. You also have just other manufacturers making similar stuff as well. And with the release of the Switch 2 coming out in 2025, which is definitely going to be before the next Steam Deck, because Valve has actually clarified they're not going to make another Steam Deck until, like, in their words, we're 2 years away, which was last year. So 2025 or 6 is when we're probably going to see the next Steam Deck. Well, probably 26. But with Xbox trying to get into that market too, I think it's becoming more of the idea, David, that it's becoming about meeting people where they are at. Like the Steam Deck has its own use, and not everybody will use it in the way it's made for, but it can get more people into gaming or to buy games and stuff like that. And that's what I think Xbox is banking on, as well as just spreading themselves as many places as possible, as many screens as possible, to just get people to buy their stuff. So I think it's just fascinating to see Xbox go this route, as well as releasing games outside of the ecosystem. Like you have Hi-Fi Rush, which was a pretty wonderful title release last year. I played a little bit of it, and like they have games like that, and Sea of Thieves coming to PlayStation. That's kind of crazy. And and I can imagine there's going to be more, man. Like I would love for the Master Chief Collection to come on PS5. That just opens up to way more people. These are also classic games. This is history. So like, I think in that aspect is cool, but also like I have friends that only have a PS5, like that live far away. And I would love for them to have MCC on their PS5 so I could play with them. But I don't know. What do you think of that? What do you think of Xbox going through and releasing their catalogs somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a gamble, because on one hand, more systems that your games are available on means more money.
Moolah.
But on the other hand, you have the potential of diluting your brand.
Yep.
You also have the potential of becoming sort of irrelevant in the industry, as Sega did. Because Sega was a force to be reckoned with in the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
And
they did what Nintendo don't.
And I mean, like...
They also did what Nintendo don't and went out of the market.
Yeah. And I mean, at the time, you know, it probably, the idea that, you know, you could see iconic Sega characters like Sonic the Hedgehog appearing on Nintendo systems would have probably been pretty cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that came a little too late with Smash Bros. But back in the 90s, that would have been a mind-blowing thing.
Yeah.
But you see how easily all of Sega's cultural clout came to naught, and as iconic as Sonic was, he's really not that relevant anymore.
No.
And so, yeah.
Sorry, Sonic fans. He's not that relevant anymore, guys. You creeps.
Not to say that there are people who, don't enjoy Sonic games anymore.
No, they're all creeps, David.
But let's be honest. Mario has remained consistently relevant.
Yeah.
Sonic has not.
Well,
so it's... I don't say this to insult Sonic.
I do.
I mean, I love ripping on Sonic as much as the next guy, but in this specific instance, I'm not trying to rip on Sonic.
You want to get those votes from the Sonic fans, David.
Yeah. Vote for me.
Vote for me.
Whatever. I'm not sure yet. I'll tell you later. But what I want to say is,
oh man,
it's kind of easy come, easy go sort of thing, you know?
Yeah.
So sure, Microsoft has Halo. Microsoft has the iconic Master Chief, you know, and the idea is like, I can play Halo on the PlayStation. Oh my God! kind of a thing. But
oh my God.
But I could easily see a future where Microsoft and its once iconic game franchises are no longer relevant to the industry.
Yeah, I think they're getting to the point where they are tiptoeing into that direction. Like they are just about to cross that line. They had a whole, I remember online earlier this year when it happened where the rumors are like, oh my God, they're going to release Xbox games on Switch and PlayStation. And the whole internet was freaking out and having a spaz attack because of these rumors. That wasn't real. We didn't know what was going to happen at this point. It prompted Microsoft to make like a really weird, they called it a podcast, like where they sat down for like 30 minutes and were interviewed by some rep at Microsoft of their marketing team and talked about the future of the brand. And it was so like such a non-committal, non-answer kind of thing. They did say like, we're looking toward the future and maybe adding more games to this list of releases. And I'm like, okay, but you're not like saying what those are. And they also said, we were not going to also announce any of these games here on this podcast. We're going to let the studios handle it in their time. And it was like, they've done just a terrible job at communicating their strategies to the fans. And that where the point it's like, they're getting so bad at it that it's like, we don't know if they like are going to eventually go third party. We don't know if they're going to like make more Xboxes, which they probably are, but it's like getting to that point where the communication's poor, really terrible. And they just need to work on that and keep working on it because like we might get a handheld Xbox thing, which would be awesome, I guess. I don't know if I would buy it, but it would then bring, it would have that role. They would also, they have streaming. They have a lot of different options they can do. But once that genie, David, is out of the bottle of releasing on different platforms, especially like once Halo's done out there, which I don't necessarily think will happen soonish, but I could see in the future happening. Once that genie's out, it's out and it's no going back in. They could still make consoles, they can still make hardware, but it's like they're kind of diminishing their whole role in all of this, which in the end might make them more money, which is what they need right now. Who knows? But yeah, also Activision Blizzard, man, 75 billion. God, the whole company, I think at the time was valued at 160 to 180 billion. That's nearly half of their value that they bet on that. That's crazy.
What's interesting to me is like how it's just like you would think like the whole Activision Blizzard merger in the first place was a super huge deal.
Huge.
And now Microsoft has acquired them.
Yeah.
It's like, how is that not triggering some sort of antitrust investigation?
Okay, so so this whole process is basically like a whole book could be written on it, David, because it lasted like 2 years of them trying to buy this company. And I remember I followed it through the last 2 or 3 years of them like wanting to purchase Activision Blizzard. And basically it came down to the arguments that Sony and other companies made, and the FCC as well made against Xbox, never really held up in any court. And the judges sided with Xbox in the end. There were many, many times where we're like, wow, this is not going to go through. This is not going to happen because of anti-consumerism or stuff. But let me tell you also something else, David. Tencent was also in line to purchase Activision Blizzard. Do you know what Tencent is, David?
I've heard the name.
So they are a conglomerate, they're a company, an entertainment company that has a lot of capital, but most of that capital is from the Chinese government. And they are a Chinese corporation. And they have so many fingers and so many different bowls in the industry. They have a minority stake in nearly every AAA company right now. They were going to purchase ABK, but when the dealings were happening and Bobby Kotick, the CEO of Activision Blizzard, was doing all this, it seems like Xbox would have been a more attractive purchaser versus Tencent, because the U.S. government definitely didn't want anything China-related getting into spending this kind of money on American like corporation. So you have that aspect, but you also have the thing of like Microsoft owns like the biggest AAA publisher as well. So, and they're also a publisher, so it's like that's kind of weird as well. They've done everything they can to making like they have 10-year deals with Sony, PlayStation, even Valve, saying we're going to bring Call of Duty to your services or platforms. But that's just 10 years. I mean, who knows what they're going to do down the line?
I mean, at this point, the way we see things going, I mean, in 10 years, is Call of Duty even going to be relevant anymore?
Exactly. Like there could be something else that comes out. You never know. And like the industry is like so volatile in that aspect that these companies are just really trying to hanker down and betting on what is successful. But Call of Duty is just being run into the ground, and it has been for the last decade. So we'll see if it even goes. But people still love it. People still like it. But we'll see in 10 years. There's more we can dive into this, but let's just move on to Sony. Sony is an interesting case as well, David. They are on the top right now in terms of the general console market, beating Xbox in sales of units and games and creating more first-party exclusive titles with celebrated acclaim the last several years. Sony seems primed to keep that up, along with a new interest in a live service initiative established by the now former CEO, Jim Ryan. Jim decided to push Sony into the live service market and develop games using its first-party studios, such as Naughty Dog, who make Last of Us, and Insomniac Games, who make Spider-Man, to make live service titles based on those universes that they have. Also, live service means like, I don't know if you're aware of it, but for those listening, it's live service means something like Fortnite, where it's constantly updated, constant content is coming out for it. You have Call of Duty, Roblox, all those games. Those are all live service games. And so Sony's like, you know what, we're taking a 30% cut from this big Fortnite thing, which is making lots of money. But what if we could take 100% of it? So they're using their own studios to make stuff like that. So it turns out they had like, I'm not going to go into everything I have written here. I've written a lot down. But basically, they had a 10-year outline or a 10-game thing where they invested in 10 different games that they were going to release in the next 5 years. And basically what they're doing is they're throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing what sticks. A recent example of that, which wasn't nearly necessarily intended to be a live service game, or in terms of the aspect that the outlook that they have on the industry, but Helldivers 2, which recently came out. That's a wonderful example of a beautiful game, beautifully designed, super fun, super crunchy shooting, just an amazing game with an amazing concept of carrying it on as a live service. Like, David, I don't know if you heard about this, but the social media, like the whole game is basically Starship Troopers, and you have like the United Nations or whatever, thing in that universe that has propaganda sent out, and they're using like Twitter and like social media platforms to send the propaganda out to also like double as saying like, hey players, we need to kill the automatons, we need to strike at this planet, the bugs are coming on this planet and we need to destroy them, like you need to go and hop online and play the game and get rid of them. That's the initiative this weekend, you know. So it's like really cool. They're doing like this real cool meta thing with this game, and it's really hit really well, and they sold a ton of copies, made a ton of money off of it. And it's also just a really good game. So that's just one example. So basically, like, Naughty Dog had one in development called Factions, which was like a multiplayer game in the Last of Us universe. You had Insomniac making a game with a multiplayer Spider-Man game, which sounds awesome. It was called The Great Web. You also had at this time Bungie getting purchased by Sony, which is very interesting when that happened. Bungie, the guys who made Halo, who make Destiny, they got purchased. And they were purchased for the sole reason of Sony basically using them as a barometer of how successful or potentially successful the live service games they have in development were going to be. So you had Bungie being a representative going to these studios and evaluating them and seeing if they would be good enough to get released. So because of the success of Destiny 2. So really interesting stuff happening. Basically what's happened is, and I'm not going to... I have walls of text written, and I'm basically like going to break down right now, where basically Naughty Dog was going to make one. They were going to make Factions, which was the code name. And Bungie basically said, there's no longevity in this. There's no player retention, good player retention in this title. So this is our advice to you, is to not go forward with it. And that's what Sony did. Sony canceled probably $100 million investment so far because of what Bungie said. So that sucks. You also had Insomniac Games releasing Spider-Man The Great Web, as it was called. And there's actually a trailer you can find on YouTube where it's basically like a marketing reveal. Like, hey, here's the game. This is what the concept is. And it got leaked out and it got canceled as well. The reason for that is a little different because the cut that Marvel and Disney is going to get from that game would be more than the investment that they wanted, the return they would get back on it, basically. Also, it would require Insomniac and Naughty Dog on these titles to invest in, for multiple years, these games and to spend just as much money as it would take to make or even more, to make a single player title that they're used to. So there's that aspect as well. A lot of this was revealed in the Insomniac leak that happened last year, which is probably the most intense leak in history. You had not just employee data, but plans for the next like 15 years at Insomniac Games and in Sony in general. You had games like they're going to make a Venom game. You have leaked footage and game tests of the new Wolverine game they have in development, which sounds pretty dope, but it's like all this stuff, like we're talking passports, data stuff, everything from Insomniac was leaked, and it was a horrifying experience. And so that's one aspect. But let me dive into Bungie here because it's really interesting. So Bungie had, we don't know if they had anything to do with the Spider-Man project, but they have been going through and evaluating different things. Also, Bungie is making a reboot of their Marathon franchise, which is going to be a live service extraction shooter. So anyway, let's dive into Bungie. Right now, it seems like Bungie could be in dire straits. The info reveals from reports and different people inside the company. The info reveals that after all the input from Bungie for their input of Sony's first-party live service projects, it turned out that Bungie failed to meet their financial quota because of the recent handling of Destiny 2 expansions. As a result, Bungie missed financial goals by 45%. A missed quota by this much usually makes a company go into financial turmoil or even closure, which wasn't the case here. Bungie pursued to fire major staff after announcement. And with PlayStation's $3.6 billion deal to purchase Bungie in 2022, it was said the majority of the money was aimed to retain Bungie staff, with final payouts set to take effect in 2026. So basically, Bungie has some form of independence here, but they've missed their quota. And right now, they have a board, and now 3 of those people are Sony reps out of 7. Bungie still has majority control. But if Sony gains majority control of Bungie, they can take it over, and that's how it works out with this deal. The final payouts are in 2026, which for all the people that are part of this board and the leadership of Bungie, And so they're kind of hoping to release a marathon before then so that they can get those payments and get out when they can from, to get the money, which is fine. Like that's part of what this deal was. But it seems like their leadership has done a poor job managing Destiny 2. And as a result, it's looking really bad that they are judging Sony's first party portfolio on their live service initiative. So you have that aspect of like Bungie basically becoming a lemon and them not being like, they're not serving their purpose of what they were purchased for. So there's that aspect of it. Let's see, where am I here? So basically, Sony's in a lot of turmoil in terms of leadership. Jim Ryan just got retired. They have a new CEO coming in. They're stepping back from this live. They seem to be stepping back from this live service initiative. You'll still get games that are coming out in this initiative, but it's like an interesting bet that has not turned out at all well for them. But let's move on to hardware. In terms of next-gen consoles, the PS6 is assumed to be in development at this time. But when will we see it? The year of speculation is 2028. But who knows if plans will change? Maybe it's possible for Sony to go against Xbox in 2026. Or maybe Sony will take a different approach. You see, it has now been confirmed by, again, Moore's Law is dead on YouTube, that Sony has in development a new handheld to combat the likes of the Switch, Steam Deck, and possibly the new Xbox handheld. It is not a PSP or a PS Vita 2, but instead it will be yet another console-like handheld. So the state of Sony is kind of a disaster right now, David. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, it seems like they've been so dominant in the industry for so long. At a certain point, they're gonna make some missteps, and this might be the time for them to make some missteps.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing an interesting change of leadership because the new CEO is I would kind of compare him to, we haven't seen like his effect on the company, yet, but I would compare him similar to a Furukawa kind of figure at Nintendo. But this guy comes from Sony and the board of Sony, who is now the CEO of PlayStation. So he was the CFO of Sony just in general, and we're talking games, music, everything, movies, and to now being just in charge of the gaming division. So now he's like kind of being demoted to run the ship. So there's that aspect as well. And I don't know what the future holds for them. They're still successful. People still love the brand. They're becoming more and more like Apple every single year. Just in the sense of ecosystem, and just people being used to that and being used to investing in that and being comfortable with it. So there's that aspect as well. But with new leadership, I don't know. Like a lot of the factions game sounds awesome, David. Like Naughty Dog making a multiplayer game in The Last of Us where you're like hunkering down, stealthing through. It was set in San Francisco, so they were like recreating all of San Francisco for this game. And like it's like a battle royale as well. It's like all these different ideas, and the game was like probably like I would theorize to 50 to 60% finished. Like people were beta testing or alpha testing it right now. Like they were sending it to people to test out and making sure they have a good handle on it. And then it got canceled in early 2023 from reports. Now the leader of that project did say on social media that it has been shelved in quotes. So maybe it'll come back, but also stuff like that would suck. Your prime for like Naughty Dog is Sony's prime star developer. Like you also have Sony Santa Monica, who made the recent God of War games, but Naughty Dog is Naughty Dog. And for Sony to let Bungie have like say over how they do business, which they've been doing a long time, to be fair, Bungie has too, but that Naughty Dog has been put in front of like the fire to be told a story by Papa Bungie, being like, you ain't doing a good job, boy. You got to go out and chop more wood or get rid of the woodshed. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, we've been working on this for a long time. And even if it isn't a game that like will last years, it's fine if a game doesn't last years. I mean, not every game has to be Fortnite. A game could be like a fun 6-month investment or something, like a Call of Duty.
That's the thing is if Sony is trying to do this whole live service initiative, then they're they probably want to make sure that it's going to be successful in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're going to continually be putting resources into a game, continually, you want to make sure it's something that can retain players.
Yes. That's
so
true.
And Bungie, I mean,
their
recent missteps notwithstanding, Bungie is a company that knows a little something about creating games that retain their player base.
That is true. Yeah.
So if Bungie says this game isn't going to retain its player base, and this is a game that Sony's going to be putting resources into continually, I could see, as much as it sucks, I could see why they would go the route to shelve it or cancel it. I mean, if it's true that they've invested, $100 million or whatever number you said into
that's theorized, like that's the theorized theory right now.
Into it, I doubt they're gonna just like scrap it completely, because The Last of Us has become quite the franchise. I mean, it has its own TV show now, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, and with the release of season 2 next year, it would have been a great time to release a multiplayer game for that universe.
So the franchise is definitely not the problem. So I can definitely see them bringing it back at some point. I can't see them being just like, oh, Bungie said to cancel it, so we're canceling it and we're never bringing it back. That doesn't seem smart.
But again, we really don't know if that, if it will come back or not. But I find it interesting that Bungie is like, I find it interesting that they are the ones that are now like kind of doing damage control at their own company because of their own fumbles. And it's sad because I like Bungie. I think they've done some really amazing things. Even though I'm not a Destiny player, I've heard really great things, but also really bad things about Destiny 2. Also, they also fired, I forgot to mention this, David. They fired Michael Salvatore, the last, one of the composers of the Halo soundtracks, as well as Destiny. Marty McDonald left a long time ago at Bungie, but Michael Salvatore has made some real great bangers with Destiny from what I've heard. And for him to just be gone is kind of sad. Like, apparently his work is done on the next expansion releasing this summer. But like, dude, that guy's been there for like 20 plus years, as well as other people that were like part of management, that were part of direction, part of just a bunch of different aspects that are now gone, that have been there for 20 years. But these are people that cost a lot of money. So I understand why they had to be cut. But it's an unfortunate situation overall.
Yeah.
So I think where I want to go from here, do you have anything else to say about Sony?
Nah.
Okay. Basically, where I want to go from here is with the economy and the way things are right now, the industry is in a really, I would say, drastic scenario. I mean, it's not going away, but there's so much, the bubble has burst, and there is so much divestment happening right now, or at least the company's trying to stay afloat right now, and that's where they are, but it's only going to last for so long. I think there's a lot of positivity look toward the future. You have stuff like the China Hero project, which was made by Sony, and they are basically, it's a project that was started in 2022, and it lets developers pitch a game to Sony. With approval, they can receive mentorship, access to Sony internal resources, recoupable development funds, marketing opportunities, etc., and as well as maybe publishing. And so they did that with China, with just whatever game developers were in that country. So that was their avenue into that, as well as they're doing the same with India, which is a booming industry right now in terms of games. Like, there's a lot of, obviously, mobile playing have happened, but also like PC gaming is starting to kind of get a handle on things. And Sony wants to get into that market because the only way to get a PS5 in India is to pay exorbitant amount of money. And just in general, they're just not in that country right now. But that's a whole, I mean, these are countries also with 1 billion plus population that these companies are like trying to spread the water, or trying to spread the word and trying to get their hardware in there and trying to get approval of stuff. But we'll see if that happens. Another aspect of all this is you have Xbox, who's trying to also maximize the reach that they have. And they're doing that through streaming, through mobile, through Game Pass. They're also trying to get into these countries. Let's see, where am I? They're expanding into these countries. It's a growing market in India as well as Africa in the coming years. And so the industry is quickly like trying to find ways to expand and grow with the world economy. which is in such a depressed state. Here's my final thoughts here. With layoffs and mass firings happening at all these companies, with the exception of Nintendo, the industry is in a rough place right now. The job scene is a disaster with over 10,000 layoffs in just the first 3 months of 2024. Development costs rising, studio closures, and of course, Roblox exists. I was like, how much can I let this silence go on? This is a result of the industry receiving lots of new support through the time of COVID in the early 2020s. And lots of new investment, and the bubble has burst. Mm-hmm. With cultivation, but there is some hope. With cultivation in entertainment-hungry territories, advancements in technology, and new ways to play, potential new experiences, and the growing indie scene, and as well as the new consoles on the horizon, we shall see what the future holds as well. So, we shall see.
Yeah.
We shall see.
I mean, I think I don't think there's going to be
like a crash, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's not going to be a crash, but
Yeah.
there's also not going to be a bright future for the games industry right around the corner.
Yeah, not right around the corner. No.
No, I think we're headed for some rough times ahead as far as the games industry is concerned, just because the economy is just
it's
circling the drain right now.
Yeah.
I mean, money is tighter than ever. And you have all these conflicts and uprisings around the world, just going on around the globe right now. Have you heard that Haiti just went full boogaloo mode?
No, like economy-wise?
No, like their government is completely overthrown.
Oh, whoa, really?
Yeah, like a bunch of gangs.
Oh, yeah, I did hear about this.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Like rose up and like completely overthrew the government, and the country is...
I don't know that.
Haiti is a failed state right now.
Yeah, and it's just... There's a lot of bad things happening in the world, and yeah, that's unfortunate too.
You know, with all this stuff happening, naturally people's entertainment budget is shrinking considerably.
Yeah.
So the games industry is going to have to reckon with that.
Yeah, and we've seen some really amazing games the last 4 or so years. I mean, and also the breadth of games releasing as well, which could probably be a negative. I feel like there's such a glut and just a oversaturation of releases in terms of like, I'll give you an example. I think Steam had over tens of thousands of games released in 2023 on Steam, which is crazy. So we're talking about just the smallest kind of games to the biggest games. Like it's just, that market is so like open to anybody that it's kind of becoming the biggest thing right now is people's like attention and gaining that attention and time from those people, that it's so hard as an independent developer or even a big budget developer to get your game out there and to get eyes on it. And with the way these digital marketplaces are as well, it's kind of a wonder to see, you know, how do you get eyes on your game? Like, what's your marketing strategy in that? And will marketing even work? Like if you're advertising the next game from EA, like unless it's a Star Wars game, you're not really going to get a whole lot of eyes on it, or, you know, unless it's an Apex game or something like that. So, you know, and that's always been the case. Like known franchises are known franchises and licenses are licenses. But it's like, even for them, it's kind of hard too, because there's just so much out there to play. And I feel like a greater curation is kind of needed. I've heard Colin Moriarty from Last Stand Media talk about this a lot, especially since he owns an indie studio. It's interesting because there's some of these marketplaces like Steam are so open that it's kind of like a curation is kind of needed at some point, especially with like the rise of AI and the need for them to kind of sort through all the mass data we have on the internet. And that's kind of like the need of it right now. But like, we're kind of going to need it for games too, because with the mass releases of just thousands upon thousands of games, no human being can play them all. But obviously there's people that'll like something when they find, they're obviously looking for something that they will like, but it's going to be harder and harder to find those kind of things.
Yeah, I mean it's the same thing with the
TV as well.
Yeah, TV. As the number of channels you had increased, so did the amount of unwatchable crap that was on. It's like, nothing's on. There's 500 channels and I can't find something to watch. And the same thing happened with streaming platforms. You know, people will have like 3 or 4 different subscriptions to streaming platforms, and you're looking through them all. I'm like, there's nothing to watch.
Yeah, you spend an hour, sorting through the content instead of just watching something,
Yeah.
Like, that happens quite a bit.
But yeah, talking about curation though, it's really funny how that's such an innocuous thing, right?
Mhm.
And yet I hope it's okay if we kind of do like go off into the woods a little bit.
Yeah. Go for it.
Like, man, this whole Sweet Baby thing has just been such a wild ride.
Yeah, it really is.
All over a Steam curator group.
Yeah, it's funny how we planned. We totally planned this, by the way, right?
Yeah.
So like with curation and with this group, do you just want to dive into like your topic, David?
Sure, why not?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's get into it.
So yeah, I kind of wanted to add on to the industry talk with just a little bit of talk about gaming culture, because where I come from, I'm more of a cultural gamer than I am actually a gamer.
Yeah.
I grew up playing video games. The Super Nintendo was my jam growing up. And so long-time gamer, but as I've gotten older, I just don't have the time or the inclination anymore to really actually do all that much gaming. But being that I've been in the gaming world for so long, I'm still fascinated by the culture of it. So that's kind of what I want to talk about, is more gaming cultural stuff, because it's kind of interesting. So yeah, this whole thing with so Sweet Baby Inc. is a consulting firm, and essentially what they do is they help flesh out characters and storylines in games.
They do consult work, yeah.
But that's their focus in consulting, is the writing, the stories, the characters. But the interesting thing about them is their express mission and purpose is to push for more representation, push for more LGBTQ characters, stuff like that. More, female empowerment, all that. And it's kind of a thing that rubs people the wrong way, because most gamers are not what you would call stuffy old conservatives. And like,
there's more nuance to it. To a lot of people.
I mean, and this is from someone who could be characterized by certain people as a stuffy old conservative, but gamers by and large are not that. And they have never been that by and large.
Yeah.
So, the idea that gamers are in need of, being re-educated on the topics of diversity and LGBTQ representation and so on and so forth is a little bit ludicrous in my eyes. And naturally, it would seem that a lot of gamers find this kind of this political focus intruding into games more than a little tiresome.
Yeah, and I would just like to say, like, before, I think what you say on it is so is poignant to that, because yes, not every gamer is like a stuffy old conservative. In fact, it's, you know, there's much more. A lot of people play games for stuff, but also there's also the aspect of the things that, and I find it interesting because the people that are behind Sweet Baby Inc. and the people also who run like the games media side of things, like the websites, what influence they have on the industry as well. They all kind of agree with each other. They're all kind of in the same boat. They're all kind of all ideologically in line. And it is kind of unfortunate to see that because when we speak about diversity, because a lot of people do play games, like diversity of thought is not mentioned nearly enough. And diversity of thought is probably nearly, I would say, one of the most important ones. But with this kind of thing, and with the games industry, with the media, with Sweet Baby Inc. that has recently popped up, it's like this whole, not everybody has this ideology. And usually the people that are in line with all these things don't, like, yes, they play games, but it's not the mass majority of people. And them trying to ensue this kind of thing and kind of like be a consultant group, if people are interested in that, that's fine. If people want to play games like that, that's fine. I mean, there's a lot of things I enjoy that I disagree with. We've had that conversation on this podcast. But really, the core of it, I think, is it's something that is being pushed on the games industry that has been going on for many, 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 many years. However, it's okay for games to get political, but when you're trying to kind of change the way people think of creating them, it's kind of touchy, to say the very least.
I mean,
yeah.
What it really boils down to
what is it really,
people don't like ideologies pushed onto them. Like,
yeah.
Like, so
I agree.
By and large, gamers are not what you would call a right-wing group.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I would venture to say that
majority of them are
majority of them lean left.
Yeah.
But
or even in the middle.
Yeah, so there's a difference between being on the left and being like on the far left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there might be certain things that you can agree on, but there's some pretty major differences. And essentially what people on the far left like to do is they like to push their ideology on people and then mischaracterize them when they resist having this ideology pushed on them. So you see this happen time and time again, all the way back to, because this whole Sweet Baby thing has been called Gamergate 2.0 or Gamergate 2. So you see this whole thing going back as far as the original Gamergate. So you had
what was that, 2012?
That was in 2014.
14, that was it. Okay.
Yeah, and it lasted for about a year. So basically, the Gamergate was kind of weird because it didn't really have any concrete goals. It kind of started off as this sort of backlash over this perceived relationship between game developer Zoe Quinn and Kotaku journalist Nathan Grayson. Because basically Zoe Quinn developed the game and it had all these all this ideological push in it, all these far left themes. And
you're talking about the one she made, not the one she had a Kickstarter for, right? It's the weird like FMV one is one I'm thinking of, I think.
I can't remember what the game was.
Yeah. It's one that never came out.
No, it came out.
Okay, yeah. Which one?
It came out. All right, so I should amend a previous statement. It didn't actually start with anything to do with far left ideology at all.
Okay.
So the game that Zoe Quinn developed was called Depression Quest. and it received rave reviews in gaming media. But as far as I know, the actual consumer reaction to it was less than enthusiastic.
Got quite a bit of awards from people too.
Yes. That's what I'm talking about. The media fawned over this game. And so the whole Gamergate thing started with this accusation that Zoe Quinn was essentially trading sexual favors for positive coverage from this Nathan Grayson dude in Kotaku. Because as we know, games journalists are a very tight-knit ideologically aligned group, right?
Mm-hmm. And driven.
So it's very easy to see how, some positive articles and pushing from Nathan Grayson could have led to the game's wider acclaim in the game from games journalists as a whole. So this whole thing started as basically a reaction against this idea that Zoe Quinn was essentially using the structure of the games journalism industry to try and get attention for her game. And it was all about ethics in games journalism. It didn't actually have much to do with far left politics to begin with.
It was more about the relationships between people who make games that are aligned with the values of the journalists, basically.
Yeah, it was. Yes, it was more so about
them propping it up.
Yeah, it was more so about the games journalists propping up games that they felt aligned with their particular interests or values, instead of providing fair and balanced and honest coverage of the games industry as a whole.
As well as you also had people like Zoe Quinn, but you also had those like Anita Sarkeesian as well take advantage of that.
Yeah, and that's where the identity politics thing started to come into play. You had Anita Sarkeesian, who was essentially an outsider.
Yeah.
She was not part of part
of the industry.
Part of the industry, and she was not what you would call a gamer by any stretch of the imagination. But she started to essentially comment upon the games industry, trying to basically critique games from the perspective of far left politics. And the backlash happened when games journalists propped her up and amplified her voice. And people started to see this and were, upset that they had to deal with games journalists who, instead of just providing fair and balanced coverage of the games industry, were actively involved in pushing an outsider's political opinions upon them.
Yeah, and I think it's weird because before this, it wasn't really that was never really an issue. Like, you had games like BioShock, which were very political, and like showed an ideology through a different lens. And you had games that were political. Like, there's nothing wrong with games being political in that sense, or like infusing stuff. I don't think it's inherently wrong, but it's if it benefits the game, that's great. BioShock's a great example of that. You also have stuff like Spec Ops: The Line, which is kind of like a commentary on Afghanistan in a way, and the modern like war effort with the United States and the effects that it has on countries that we're invading. And like, so it's not really, I wouldn't think it's necessarily wrong to have politics in quotes in games, but to have it made in I'm trying to figure out what I want to describe here, but having it like, I think it's all based on what people are creating it. And those like Anita and Zoe wanted to really like have a great effect on it, and kind of just for their own gain in the sense, not to drive. Yeah, they were all ideologically aligned, and that's the avenue they used to get famous. That's the avenue they used to get money, to stay relevant, even though they are irrelevant today. Anita kind of stays a little bit, but it's definitely not. Zoe Quinn also had a. If you want to go look this up, Sophia Narowitz on YouTube and Twitter kind of tracked this down, where she like tracked down who Zoe Quinn was, and like basically did a ton of research and investigation into her and what she was doing after all of this Depression Quest stuff. She had a game in development that was an FMV game, had a lot of different gaming journalists and YouTubers in it, and it looked like a trash bin, honestly, and it had a Kickstarter. And I'm going to quickly look up, I don't know what the Kickstarter was, but like the money, but it was in the tens of thousands of dollars that she got for this game to create it. And she had a pitch video. She had even the Jimquisition at the time, as he was referred to in there. Somebody, I think it was either Bradley Ellis or somebody else from Easy Allies was also in there as well. Like just people she knew, people who were friends of her. And it's like, and I could be wrong, it's probably not Bradley Ellis. This might be one of the others of Easy Allies. But also it's like, you had this game she created and kickstarted, and then Sophia Narowitz dug into it, and because the game never came out, and she's like, where did the money go? Zoe then proceeded on, if you go through her Twitter, she proceeded to post pictures of her taking a vacation to Japan. She also released updates about the game, and it was just, I need to do more research on this, like of the last updates and the money it created. But basically, she theorized that, yeah, all this money's kind of gone. She kind of just took it and ran. This game was supposed to be made like 7 years ago. It's never happening at this point.
Yeah.
And it's just like she took the money and ran. It's really sad that those kind of people like Zoe were kind of prompted up by the games industry, who just, she had really like, it was just like a wolf in a hen's house, really.
But that's the interesting thing too, is this whole Gamergate movement, it lasted for about a year.
Yeah.
But it was never a unified movement.
No.
And it never had any clear goals.
Now, I have a question for you, though. Sorry to interrupt you. When you mean Gamergate, are you talking about the situation in itself, or like Gamergate being the people that were against the movement of ideology in the people making games?
Gamergate was the backlash against against games journalists and against identity politics being pushed in games.
Okay, because like when I heard of the term, I'm like, I don't even know what this is or what it means. But so thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. So Gamergate didn't last for very long. It had no clearly defined goals, no unified structure, and so eventually it just petered out. And essentially, the games journalism industry just kind of continued on the way it was, and no meaningful change happened. So, and which is really interesting, because now when you look up, because now all you have in terms of concrete information on Gamergate is journalistic coverage of Gamergate. So you've gone from what it actually was to what is
written about the history of it by those who write the history.
Yeah, so now you have this essentially rewritten history about the whole movement, and it's just so fascinating to me, because like, here's the Wikipedia article on Gamergate. Gamergate was a loosely organized misogynistic online harassment campaign and a right-wing backlash against feminism, diversity, and progressivism in video game culture. Like complete and total misrepresentation of what Gamergate was, what it was about. And yet, because Gamergate never produced any concrete results, as far as the movement was concerned, all we have that's left of it is this negative press coverage. And so it's kind of interesting how entrenched the games journalism is, to the point where the consumer, the actual people buying the games that these journalists are writing about, could do nothing to change it. And so it this is all sort of coming to a head again in terms of this whole Sweet Baby Inc. controversy, which I find so fascinating. So it all starts with a simple Steam curator group marking what games Sweet Baby Inc. is involved with. So if people want to avoid them because of the ideology that they push, then they can. It's merely to provide information. And so, but what ends up happening is Sweet Baby Inc. catches wind of this Steam curator group, and using the power of the entrenched games journalism industry, creates a massive crap storm, turning this simple curated list of here's games that they worked on, if you're interested in knowing, to, oh, it's a targeted harassment campaign against me kind of a thing. You know, it's just fascinating to me how these exact same sort of issues have come to a head, 10 years later. Because this is this is essentially the 10-year anniversary of Gamergate.
Yeah.
And so it's just so fascinating to me how the exact same issues are coming to a head exactly 10 years later. And this time, though, there is a little bit of a bright spot on the horizon. As terrible as it is that, the economy is going down the toilet, it's kind of funny that it's having the unintended side effect of basically taking down games journalists as well. Not that I want to celebrate anyone losing their job, but it's like these people have done a lot of damage for a lot of years. And so I think it's kind of interesting that simple economics are going to be these people's downfall, because Kotaku has recently gone through a massive shift to they've fired hundreds of people, and their whole company is restructuring. So they're not going to focus on games journalism anymore. They're going to focus on putting out video game guides, which these days can be mostly done with AI.
Yeah.
And all you need is the AI.
To be fair, a lot of things can be written by AI.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Nowadays, all you really need to write a game guide is an AI, and then someone to go over and check it and make sure there's no mistakes or anything like that in it.
When they were announcing that, and did they mention AI?
No, they didn't mention AI, but a lot of people are speculating that essentially was, if Kotaku goes through with this whole restructuring and change in business model, that the game guides are going to be written by AI.
Okay. So it's like presumed that it'll be.
Yeah, the presumed business model is that the guides are going to be written by AI, and what little staff that they do retain will be there simply to go through these AI written guides and make sure they're presentable for release.
I think this whole thing with Sweet Baby Inc. is fascinating because, like you said, it's the 10th anniversary of Gamergate. I remember during that time, it was like you're hearing about it. I'm like, man, what's going on? It was like a whole cultural awakening during that time, and it's funny how that in the games industry, it kind of was the starter of a lot of of a lot of cultural revelations from people. I mean, you had Anita Sarkeesian, which drew eyes to people like Sargon of Akkad, who people flocked to him, and then he grew a fan base, and now he has a business. And I'm more fans of him because he's more of the sense of freedom and just freedom of thought as well, and versus people like those we've mentioned, where they're like, you know, they want to have people with fixed mindsets to only view life through the lens that they do, whether it be through race or gender or whatever. And I think that's if you want, you know, I feel like people can live the way they want, but if you look at life through those kind of lenses, you're kind of just selling yourself short, because there's so much more to life than that, especially if you actually go out and live in the real world. And I think what's unfortunate is, like, Sweet Baby Inc.'s a consultant, right? So they have to, so they go and they make money off of giving their opinion and what they would recommend for the developer to do.
Yeah.
I went to their website here, and these are the list of projects that they have. I'm just going to list off just a few. They have big AAA titles they've worked with on, such as Alan Wake 2, God of War Ragnarok, Spider-Man 2, the most recent Suicide Squad game that came out. And then they have a list of like developers here, such as Xbox Game Studios. They have Electronic Arts. I know for a fact they're working along with EA on the new Black Panther game that's coming out, as well as the Iron Man game that's releasing as well. They're working with Ubisoft, Square Enix, Take-Two, Warner Brothers Games, Wizards of the Coast even, Raw Fury, who's a publisher, and Remedy, who makes Alan Wake. And so it's just interesting to see. Oh, People Can Fly is on here. That's, man, you have People Can Fly, Compulsion Games. Like, People Can Fly made the Bulletstorm games and like Duke Nukem and all that, which is that's kind of fun to think of. But also Valve is also listed on here. So I'm kind of interested to see what their relationship is with some of these companies, because I'm sure it's like, yes, they're a consulting group, and yes, they're kind of obligated by their company to find a consultant group for some of these projects. I heard people talk about that some of these companies that they're working with are like obligated to find people like Sweet Baby Inc. because of the investment of money that they have from other parties that want to push stuff like ideological stuff like this that Sweet Baby Inc. promotes. And it's just, first off, I want to say that some of these games are like fantastic. Like, I love God of War Ragnarok, and I cannot wait to play Alan Wake 2. As well as Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not like they're making games bad or good or anything.
Yeah, it's not. They're ruining the games.
And there's thousands of people working on a lot of these titles, so there's just another aspect in that.
Yeah.
But it is important to, in the writing process and the script process for these games, that's what Sweet Baby Inc. is consulting on, like the direction of the story, different characters, and what race and gender they are, and how to promote or show that in a light that's positive, or to put more focus on through race and gender and stuff like that, which, like, just give me a good story. Like, I don't really care about all that stuff, to be quite frank. Like, I just want to play good games.
Yeah.
And they've been part of some good stuff, but it's like, I just think it's good to remember that, I don't know, they don't have a ton of control, but they definitely do have some input for sure.
Yeah, and it's really just, it's not even, the problem isn't that they exist.
No.
The problem isn't that they're doing what they're doing. The problem is that they're using less than ethical means to promote themselves by slandering other people, you know?
Yeah, and that's true too. That's
really, that's really where the backlash is coming from. Because like I said,
let's go back to the curator page and what's happened with them. What's happened with the Sweet Baby Inc. Detected page on Steam? Like, what has that all ensued?
So,
because they made this curator page.
Yeah, they made the
Sweet
curator
Baby
page.
Inc. got mad at them. And so what has been said about the curator page, and why is there a backlash on it?
So essentially what happened is Sweet Baby Inc. tried to characterize this curator page as a harassment campaign against them. And
That's
people
so
naturally reacted badly to that, because
yeah.
that's an awful take on this.
Yeah, it's not harassment at all. Just to give context to the listeners, there are a Steam curator pages for a vast amount of things. It could be like, oh, there's pretty anime girls in this game, and that's a curator page. Like there's stuff like that, but there's also stuff like there's a certain like software in this game. Like if you should be aware of it because we don't like the software could take advantage of your computer security wise. Or there's stuff like there's meme ones like it's Vader, Darth Vader, and he's recommending games on Steam, and everyone he recommends says, "Luke, I am your father." That's all he says. Like it's meme stuff, but there's also genuine informative ones as well. Like, hey, there's this software, there's this, it's from this developer, uses this DRM or whatever. Like there's a lot of different ones. Like Sweet Baby Inc. Detected is not like a special case or anything.
Yeah, no, this kind of thing has been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
And Sweet Baby Inc. decided to try and make use of their industry connections to try and falsely characterize this as a harassment campaign against them. And people naturally reacted badly to this. And I've just seen some like the mask has kind of come off some of these people. Some of the, they want to talk like they're the good guys and they're the ones who are going to be on the right side of history and all this and that. But it's like, there's been games journalists who are essentially calling for purges of gamers based on ideological lines.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, it's like...
Yeah, some of the leadership in this company and some of the people that are working with stuff like Compulsion Games and EA have said some like nefariously like blatantly racist things on Twitter, like saying how they want the elimination of white men is one example.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are you talking about, man? Like, get out of here. Like replace white with any other color and it's like immediately a different story. Like it's just blatantly racist. And it's not right.
It's really funny too to me that
I mean, if somebody wants that opinion, like there's freedom of speech, but it's like, dude, what are you doing?
Gamergate was almost like the canary in the coal mine for a lot of this woke sort of ideological stuff that's been going on recently.
Yeah.
Gamergate was
not recently in the last 10 years and plus,
But I mean, it's ramped up a lot more.
Oh, yeah.
More recently.
Yeah.
Whereas Gamergate back in the day was kind of the canary in the coal mine for this stuff. It was like the first glimmer of, hey, this ideology is trying to take over our culture, kind of a thing. That's where you get the whole idea of a culture war to begin with. A lot of that came out of Gamergate and the immediate aftermath of that, So it's fascinating to me that the games journalists are once again showing their true face to the world.
Yeah, and it's sad because it looks like the people who are the in-group, who have the connections, who run Sweet Baby Inc., are also connected with people at Kotaku and PC Gamer as well. Like PC Gamer, Kotaku, a lot of some different websites wrote stories about this to have them in a positive light and kind of like demean the Steam curator group. The people who are part of Sweet Baby Inc. have gone after the guy who runs Sweet Baby Inc. Detected, and they're kind of like calling for doxing of him. They're saying to go and they've tried to get mass reporting of the curator group, like negative reviews of the group on Steam. And it's just like they're going after this one guy who made it and trying to ruin his life because he goes against what they want or something. And it's like they've turned, like you were saying earlier, they turned to this small little situation that was nobody's radar at all, even in the pundits of the game industry or in the mass or in the popular places, to such a massive like mountain out of a molehill situation where it's like just it is Gamergate 2 as we know it. and people are starting to catch wind, and the light, they're starting to see things for what they truly are.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating too that this coincides with just the wider culture in general. People are starting to wake up that to the fact that this whole push for diversity and equity and all those buzzwords that people use, people are starting to wake up to the fact that the people who are pushing this stuff were not doing so with shall we say the best of intentions.
Yeah, it's more like the people that are in time and time again, the people who are in charge of stuff that push this kind of thing seem to kind of be, I mean, we've already mentioned scumbags like Zoe Quinn and Anita, to be quite frank, like they are, but and try to take, gain influence and money out of people. But also it seems like these people just aren't good people who run any of this stuff.
No.
And it's just unfortunate. I mean, I've met people who really push this kind of thing, like in my life, that are good people. I think they're just wrapping their head around this kind of thing and trying to use it as a lifestyle, and they're good people, but they're kind of misguided.
Yeah. And that's the problem with this. That's the problem with this kind of far left ideology is not that everyone who is a far leftist is a scumbag, but the problem is I mean, I don't want to insult anyone necessarily, but
well, here's the thing. Let me touch on that. Like I've worked in the education space for quite a bit, for 5+ years, and I've worked with many of far leftists and many of a more very far leftists, and I've also worked with, many people around the spectrum of ideologies and political stuff. But I think from what I've learned just growing up and maturing and living life, it's like and we've touched on this before, it's a thing that's in their life, they're kind of missing a purpose, or they're attaching themselves to this thing because they want to do something good for the world.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an avenue that they see as a good of the world, but it's been marketed to them as such. Yeah. It's been pushed on them as such. It's been pushed as, this is for the good of everybody, and you should promote this because it is the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's for the greater
good, and it's misguided so much of what people really need, which is what, they really need God. That's the truth of it all.
Yeah.
But honestly, and a lot of people in different a lot of different things dive into this, dive into stuff like this, where they make it their life goal to pursue this kind of thing, or to put it on them as a lifestyle, which could also be dangerous as well. You never know what could happen, I would say.
The real danger is that people who want more control they want more money. And the way they do this is by destabilizing culture, destabilizing society.
That's right.
And so the problem is
through avenues of viewing things through race and gender and classism.
Yeah.
That's the main thing.
And so,
which all calls back to Marxism.
Yeah.
So
the problem is not that leftists are bad people.
No, not at all.
Is that essentially they're misguided, and the
polarization.
The people who are wanting to see society destabilized so they can swoop in and gain control view these people as essentially useful idiots.
Yeah, and I think you bring up polarization in the last couple shows we did, and it's such a thing that needs to be talked about in this current day, especially in 2024, because like we've already established, when you view life through these very skewed lenses of race and gender, you're not looking at it in reality. You're looking at it through a lens of kind of demeaning life in a way, because you're kind of excluding what is important.
Because you've reduced all life and all of its complexity, and you reduced it down to a conflict.
Yep.
You've reduced it down to an antagonistic relationship between oppressor and oppressed, whether that's along racial lines, gender lines, class lines. It's all, you're taking life, which is a complex thing that none of us truly understand.
Yeah.
And you're reducing it down
It's
to
all
this
about
oppressor-oppressed conflict.
Yeah, it's all about this or that, the color of your skin, or how much money you make. It's none of that.
It's like
there's so much more nuance.
It's like it reminds me of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and they come across the anarcho syndicalist peasants, and you have this character Dennis who just won't shut up about his political opinions, and then you have the old lady. The old lady next to him is like, "Oh, there you go, Dennis, bringing class into it again." And then he responds, "But that's what it's all about."
And that was like 50 years ago. Like, oh, it's so funny. Oh man, like I think, that kind of threw me off. I don't know where I was gonna go with this. Polarization. Like, it really saddens me to see, especially like companies who, and I'm talking about independent companies here, that are like dependent on the audience and depending on like crowdfunding and stuff, because you have examples like Kind of Funny Games. I'm going to open up that can of worms. Kind of Funny Games, who I really actually still enjoy their content and really like what they do. During 2020 and during 2020, I'll mention this because in 2020, it was really interesting because you had a company that tried to stay politically neutral with the exception of some of the topics they'll have on their like conversational podcasts, but tried to stay in a neutral position and just talk about video games and try to be like a family or whatever, or best friends as they would call their audience. And you had the absence of Colin Moriarty, who went on to do other stuff like I've mentioned before. So he was kind of like the more moderate person in that group, which was based in San Francisco. In fact, he was the only he worked at IGN for years. He had a huge Ron Paul photo on his desk and nobody said anything. But now if you ever stray away from that ideology that is of the same mind, especially in San Francisco, then you are going to get trounced and belittled and pushed out of the industry. And we've seen countless example after example of this so many times. And what I want to mention with Kind of Funny is come 2020, like Greg Miller, who's the owner of it now, or one of the owners, main face of it, he basically always didn't want anything to do with political stuff. He didn't want to comment on it. He kind of is like, that's not my thing. In 2020, with the election time and COVID and all this kind of thing, he kind of during the live stream, during election day, he kind of put up celebrations of the winning of Biden and everything. And he had himself on the camera in the corner of the screen, viewing the victory of it. And he's having this whole monologue of how this is good for the country. We're going to get back on track. We're going to get rid of hate. We're going to do all these things. And I look, and he's like, and if you're against any of this, then get out of here. You don't belong in this community. I couldn't believe it when he didn't say that verbatim, but that was basically what he was saying. And I was he's people who value stuff like he mentioned Trump and stuff like that, you have no place here. Get out of here. And I was like, holy shit, what the heck? Dude, I followed you for years. And I've never supported them financially or anything, but I'm I would absolutely question my financial investment after that. Cause I'm dude, you're getting rid of a ton of your audience and you're excluding them because of that. And it just boggled my mind. Cause I'm you have somebody his former friend, Colin, who's more open and moderate and willing to hear all sides. But then you have people like Greg Miller, who's not willing to do that, who's not willing to not listen to what he would consider BS. And it's really sad because I'm that's not BS. That's half of the country in America. And when you get rid of that, it's you're also going to get rid of a potential financial backers and partners. And and stuff like that. But the industry is so incestuous in its ideological view, David, that it doesn't really matter if he excludes them or not, because he will always be supported. Guide and Funny Games is going to be around for a while. But as well as, but there are like concerns I have, because when you do that, it's not in good faith. It's excluding people for the sake of, because they have a different opinion, which isn't right. Like, it's wrong. And I just, as a fan of Kind of Funny, I kind of felt betrayed when that happened. Not because of like, but like he called me out or anything, but like it's, or like my views, but he like really threw me off and really like drew me away, because I'm like, I don't really want to support a company that kind of views their viewers like, I don't know what word I would use, but like, just like they say best friends or whatever, but it's like, no, you're kind of just in this for other reasons. So, and I still like the guy. I still like the content he makes, but it's all through this far leftist view that he shares with everybody in the company and games journalists in general as well. And there's also other things that I have critique about them, but I won't mention them here. But when I saw that, I was like, so like, my mouth was agape. I was like, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, dude, what the heck, dude? And it was just like the polarization, like you were saying, like even somebody who like Greg Miller, which we probably have had these opinions for a long time, but it finally drove him to be like, no, I want to speak it out and take control, you know?
Yeah.
It's just really sad.
And the problem is this, with this ideology, is that it kind of eats its own.
Yep.
Because it views all of life through this conflict. So anyone who's not on board with the cause gets jettisoned. And after a certain point, people who are ostensibly on the same side begin to see, oh, we don't agree here, we don't agree here, we don't agree here. And then all of a sudden, bam, you have another division, and people who are, not committed enough to the cause, who have, wrong opinions, they got to get jettisoned too now. And so this movement kind of eats itself. It's like with the whole J.K. Rowling thing.
Yeah.
Because J.K. Rowling is like, you would think that she was like some kind of stuffy old conservative with the way the media talks about her, but she's a radical feminist.
Yeah, she's
a radical feminist. She's a leftist.
Yeah, second wave feminist, I think.
But but because of her views specifically on one issue,
yep,
she is now jettisoned. She's now no longer part of the cause, and it's really funny. Time and time again, people show that they don't want this ideological crap pushed on them, and they really tried to do it with the whole
the transgender movement. Is what you're talking about?
Well, I'm talking about J.K. Rowling.
Okay,
what was the game that just got released?
Oh, Hogwarts Legacy. That's another thing.
Legacy,
dude.
Hogwarts Legacy.
We need to talk about that.
Yeah, they really tried. They really tried to. The game's journalists tried to essentially call people to boycott this game because of its connection to J.K. Rowling, who didn't, jive.
She didn't have anything to do with the game besides creating the world.
Yeah, but she's connected in that sense.
Yeah, she's connected in that sense.
She's connected in that sense. But because she is now considered an ideological enemy of the left, the game's journalists try to get people to boycott it. They try to paint this game in a negative light, but people demonstrated once more that they didn't want this crap pushed on them, and Hogwarts Legacy was a massive success as a result.
I have so much to say about Hogwarts Legacy specifically, and I'm not even a Harry Potter fan. Like, this whole... I need to look it up. David, please talk for a little bit more. I gotta look this up. Sorry. Talk for a little bit more. I need to look this up, this guy's name. So keep going.
Yeah. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's just so interesting that this ideology continues to eat itself, and they don't realize the path that it's taking them, because time and time again people say, no, I don't want to be preached to by this crap. I don't want to have this stuff pushed on me. And time again these leftists continue to push and push and push this ideology. And unfortunately, at some point it's going to have to come to an end. But it seems like these people lack self-awareness, and they don't realize that they're essentially they're essentially phasing their own jobs out of existence through their continued insistence on trying to push this crap on people. It's crazy.
I'm really trying so hard to find the guy's name that was a developer at Avalanche Studios is the developer of Hogwarts Legacy. I'm trying so hard to find the guy's name. I can't remember his name. People in the comments, please let me know. But I do want to mention there was I remember when this game got leaked like years ago. It was like 2019 it got leaked, like long time ago. And it was like, whoa, they're making like a third person world playing VR, like a third person action open world game about Harry Potter. That sounds freaking awesome. And the guys who made Disney Infinity are going to make it. Well, we'll see how it is. And the game came out and it was awesome. The year before it came out, David, there was a guy, I can't remember his name. I feel so bad. I wish I was prepared for this, but he got canceled. He worked at the the studio, and he, I can't remember his name, but anyway, he, made a YouTube channel, which basically was commentary on like feminism, diversity, gender, that kind of thing. This whole, the whole, movement that we've been talking about. And he made a YouTube channel that like critiqued all of it. And he was he was been at the studio for decades, like years. He's been at there a very long time. And he, people found out about it. They went on crusade, and this was before like Elon bought Twitter. This was still regular Twitter, old Twitter. And they went out and they just completely dug him up, canceled him, put him in a bad light. Stories were written about him. He was totally like, they were trying to kick him out of the industry. So basically it came out later that I think it was like 2 weeks after this all started that he did announce that he was going to leave the studio, but he said for family reasons. And Last Stand Media did an interview with him where he basically talked about, it was basically time. Like there was some really big family issues happening around the same time. So it kind of like and he was working, I believe, from home at the time. And he said, and would come to the office every once in a while. And he said, basically it was like, it kind of worked out that I should have left already, but I had family stuff to attend to. So it's weird that this all happened around the same time. So like, I can't remember his name, but he was such a nice and genuine fellow. And I even watched some of his YouTube channel, and he seems like a pretty nice guy. And it's just so sad that people like him were kicked out of the games industry. I wouldn't say that, but like they really went on the offensive, like people who were part of the Twitter mob, who were part of the like what we've been discussing. And it's just really sad because you're trying to ruin a man's life financially, reputation wise, just all this other stuff over something that has nothing to do with him.
Yeah.
He's making a game based off a universe of somebody else that you hate. And now this is like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. This is 6 degrees from J.K. Rowling. And you're crucifying this man for it. And it's like, what the heck? This is so stupid. It's like those people are a-holes and degenerates that try to get rid of this man. And he was just the nicest dude. And from what I could tell, and like, you got to go look it up. Now, I can't remember his name. Please, somebody let me know in the comments. But like, you also have examples, more recent one, of like Cara Lynn, who worked at Limited Run Games, who was technically canceled, but she's on her feet and she had to leave Limited Run Games because people were trying to point out like she had opinions on transgenderism and stuff like that. And that's like the J.K. Rowling stuff. They saw that. They're like, no, Cara Lynn, we got to get rid of her. She works at Limited Run Games. We know people at Limited Run Games. We'll make sure she's gone. And as a result, she was fired and let go. And the people she worked with was super nice, but it came up somewhere higher up. So it's like super unfortunate. She now works independent with an independent comic group that make like conservative comics and stuff like that, or in that kind of light. And she's she's back on her feet. She's, working and doing stuff like that still in the industry. And the whole forefront of like the more conservative side of YouTube, like the pundit kind of side, like the Quarterine, the Melanie Mac, like we've mentioned before, kind of like upheld her and kind of like helped her along and kind of spread the word like, hey, they're doing this to her. Like we have to help her out because it was unfair what happened to her. And speaking of cancellations, like Colin Moriarty is also an example. He was canceled out of his company, Kind of Funny. And we've already mentioned before that Greg Miller is the one that now is like super political or whatever, is now taking that side. And it's just unfortunate because it's the excommunication of these people that bugs me. Mm-hmm. It's not a fair judgment. It's a public opinion. It's a kangaroo court. It's all these things that are just, it's degeneracy. Yeah. And it's rooted in, if you look at history, it's rooted in a lot of things.
Yeah, it's essentially a religion at this point.
Yep. That's right.
It's essentially a religious cult. And if you don't keep in line, then you get booted out.
And Hogwarts Legacy was the big example that they went after. It is the big target that they had to go after. Because when that game came out, first off, for years, people are like, oh, Hogwarts Legacy is going to be bad. And they wrote op-eds and articles like, this is why it's not going to be successful. This is why it's going to fail in these places. And there's even a character that's kind of like transgender. That's like a bartender. I think you've seen it.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are you guys talking about? Like they have stuff like this in the game. Like, come on. But anyway, they used that as a target and they went after Hogwarts Legacy. And Hogwarts Legacy is the biggest FU to cancel culture that I've seen. And it's awesome because, I mean, there's other examples, but it's the biggest FU because it's the highest selling game of last year in terms of dollars. In terms of like dollars and in terms of copies sold. It beat Call of Duty, David. It beat Tears of the Kingdom by the end of the year. Now, past end of the year, Call of Duty and Nintendo overtook it. But in that year, in 2023, Hogwarts Legacy was the best-selling game of 2023. It prompted Warner Brothers to take another look at the property. We now have a remake of the books coming out in a TV format that's going to be in development on HBO because of the game's success. It sold so much. It's made so much money and made so many people happy because it respected the source material and it gave people also a good game to play. Mm-hmm. And that's really, it comes down to like, we love games. We love playing good games, but we also like Hogwarts Legacy was like a great example of, and it was disaster on launch. Like people who were streaming the game were like bombarded by negativity and hate and death threats for people just playing the game on Twitch.
Oh yeah.
It was also the #1 game on Twitch for like weeks. It's like they've really tried to tear down this game in every aspect, from people who are working on it, from the people who liked J.K. Rowling, from the game's release. But in all of that, like winning wins everything basically. And it was the biggest FU to cancel culture. Like they tried their hardest, but it was a movement, but they failed. I'm really like, I can't remember the guy's name. Like when I heard about that, I felt so bad for him. And I just like, my heart went out to him and all these people as well. Like this is wrong. Like this is not a good movement of any kind. And it shows the heart of the people of this movement. Yeah. And it's not in good faith at all. It's the exact opposite. Anyway, that's all I have to say about Hogwarts Legacy. I remember when this all happened and I was like, man, like, oh, F those people, like they suck. Like, because what they're doing is wrong. It's heinous. It's not right.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, this is all this to say is that despite being the stuffy old conservative that I am, I have no.
Are you stuffy? I don't think so.
I have no.
You're not no Care Bear.
All right then.
That's not what I meant.
I
was trying to think of things with stuff in them.
Like, I don't. It doesn't bother me to see stuff outside of my own political opinions
Yeah.
pop up in video games and in video game culture. But when you are so consumed with an ideology that you're willing to slander and defame others and try to get them fired from their jobs over it, then that's a problem. That's a clear line that should not be crossed. And it's just a symptom of things that are going on in the wider culture. And hopefully with the attention on this whole Sweet Baby controversy, more people can start to kind of like see what's going on and be like, oh yeah, we shouldn't let this we can't let this happen anymore, kind of a thing, you know? Because that was the problem with the first Gamergate. Is sure, it was a big backlash, but it wasn't. It was a big backlash against a really hazy, nebulous, ill-defined sort of thing, you know? It's like, yeah, ideological intrusion and ethics in video game journalism and a few other things. Yeah, we don't like that hazy, ill-defined thing that we just said. And so naturally the movement petered out against the, you know, like ideologically aligned video game journalists who were trying to defame them, you know. So hopefully this time around people are there's a more clearly defined goal for this new Gamergate.
And I think we should clarify something, because this is very much stuff that's happening like online and on the internet, you know? It's not really like have any super big impact on the real world in terms of like Hogwarts Legacy, like, oh, it sold a bunch of copies because people like Harry Potter. Like it really had nothing to do with the backlash that they tried to put on it. And also it was on Twitter, which, you know, a lot of this stuff isn't like the real world. So, yeah. But it can have an effect on it, which is why people are so attached to, you know, Twitter and stuff like that. And with the like recent purchase from Elon Musk of Twitter, it seems to be getting better. There's definitely lots of issues with it still.
Yeah.
But it seems that in terms of the wave of canceling and demeaning like those of what, you know, be considered in quotes the opposite side or whatever, it seems like that's not happening anymore. I'm intrigued to see what will happen in the future, because I feel like, yes, the movement of more freedom and bringing things into the light and truth, like the movement's happening and people are waking up, you know. They're waking up from being woke. But what I mean to say here is, like the reality of things is different than what it is on Twitter, to be quite frank. And also, as well, like, yeah, we talk about culture war and stuff like that and why it's important. And it is important because, like, what's the quote from Mr. Andrew Breitbart? It's culture or is downstream from politics, or is it in the reverse of that? I don't remember. Anyway, culture, I think, is just important in general because that's where people are getting their information. That's where people are spending their free time in. And we want to be a positive force in culture and bring a positive message to it, and not stuff like, you know, demeaning people and defaming them. We want to, you know, bring things into the light and also have discussions of stuff we disagree with on. And I think if you really want to change culture, I mean, unless you have $40 billion to buy Twitter, yeah, that's one aspect of it. But if you really want to change culture, you have to create it as well. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with this podcast. Like, I wanted to create this podcast to create culture, to create something that's unique from us. And if we have somebody enjoy it and have a good time, then I've succeeded in that. We've succeeded in that, because that's what that's the goal, is to have something that's hopefully entertaining for y'all. Because time, as we've also stated in the games industry, as well as attention, is very, very, it's a commodity now. So we thank you. But did you find that quote at all, or
No, I could not find
That's
that
okay.
quote. I found
that's all right?
I found quotes about him asking John Podesta what's in his closet. That's what I found.
Okay. Oh man.
Yeah, I looked up this. I saw on this website. It's like, oh, top 10 quotes of Andrew Breitbart. And I was like, I'm sure I'll find it on there.
I'll find it on there.
And it wasn't on there. And the number one quote was, "What's in your closet, John Podesta?"
It's so random.
Yeah, but on that note, I think this whole topic of gaming as it relates to the wider culture is a good way to kind of wind down our our episode for today.
Yeah, I would say so. I would just reaffirm culture is important, and whether Twitter is real life or it's not real life. It's not real life at all. So don't take it too seriously is what I would say. But in terms of changing people's minds and influencing them, that's the internet's where it's at. And
yeah, the internet's not real life, but
no,
it's important in that it's how people communicate.
Yep.
And it's
how the message is spread or whatever.
Yeah, and unfortunately there's a literal war being waged on the West ideologically, and the internet is the battleground.
It is, and that's the prime way of explaining it. Thank you, David. Yeah, I really quickly. I was looking at the Sweet Baby Inc. List of games, and they do have a list of games they have helped in or consulted in, but some of it even is script writing and writing, as well as just sensitivity reading and stuff like that, and changing characters. Valve was listed in there, but the only thing they've consulted with Valve or planned to consult with Valve was in 2020 with Dota Underlords, which was a very short-lived card game, I think, or pseudo MOBA. I don't even remember, but they helped in the screenwriting aspect of that. And stuff like Spider-Man 2 was story, Alan Wake 2 characters and sensitivity reading, just stuff like that. So it's not, they don't they had an impact on some of this stuff, but it's not it's in different degrees.
The thing about the Sweet Baby Inc. thing is this Steam curator group had thousands of followers before this controversy broke, and it was just people who, for one reason or another, wanted to be made aware of what games Sweet Baby Inc. was working on. And unfortunately, with them trying to cancel and go after the guy who made the Steam curator group, it's
kind of backfired.
Yeah, it's the whole thing is no longer about, is Sweet Baby Inc. ruining these games or not? The conversation's not even about that anymore. No matter how much people try to pivot it back to that, it's not about that anymore.
Yeah.
It's a much larger issue now.
In fact, there's a developer of a game called Flintlock that's coming out, and they've asked to be, or I can't remember if it's been released or not, but they've asked the curator page if they could be taken off of that list because they were one of the ones that were consulted. Flintlock, A Siege of Dawn, because they consulted in writing and characters. So they've asked, hey, can we be taken off that list because we don't want anything to do with this? So it's becoming it's a deformative list, but now it's now swinging in the other direction. So one thing I do want to mention, they are consulting, they're doing story consultant for Marvel's Wolverine, which is the Insomniac game we mentioned earlier, as well as South of Midnight, which is a game made by a company, Compulsion Games, which is owned by Microsoft. So that's a Xbox first party game. So they're now getting into first party territory versus Spider-Man, Alan Wake, Suicide Squad versus the third party stuff. They're now going into the first party kind of area in both with Microsoft and Sony contracts. So that's just an interesting mention I want to put out there. But is there anything else, David, you would like to mention with this cultural thing with cancellations, Sargon, Anita, Zoe, Sweet Baby Detected? Anything you'd like, Hogwarts Legacy, anything else you'd like to mention
No, I think we've covered it pretty well. Yeah. So we've been going for almost 2 hours now.
What? We're not at 3 yet?
No, sorry. No. We've been going on for almost 3 hours.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I want right there. Dude, believe it or not, I do have more notes, but we'll save it for later. That's fine. I have stuff like analyzing Valve, Nintendo, and stuff like just miscellaneous like GTA and all that.
It sounds like you need to do a video essay at some point.
So I actually did a little bit ago, like I did a demo and I was like so camera shy and microphone shy that I was just like such a mess and like trying to get like my thoughts in range that I was like, it was like a disaster. I put it together, it was like 20 minutes, but nobody will probably ever see it. I can show you it, but it's like this, I will eventually love to do a gaming podcast. Like I would love to do a weekly gaming podcast and maybe one day and maybe with like you or someone else, like whatever works. But I'm really happy with our discussion today, David. Thank you for taking the time on discussing the current and future state as well as the cultural side of the gaming industry with me.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate you. What are you going to do after this?
Ooh. Probably eat lunch.
Yeah, me too. I haven't eaten at all today. I'm getting hungry over here. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for listening to this nearly 3-hour episode. And we want to congratulate you if you're hearing this right now because you've made it to the end. So and with that, we will let you go. And again, thank you for listening to the Snarp Fangle podcast. We value your time. We value you. And we hope you have an amazing day.
Bye-bye now.